I finally met my online friend horror story. I met a guy online. We really got on and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I did find him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life, but nothing ever happened. After a few dates, he suddenly vanished offline. No social media, he wasn't answering texts or emails, nothing. I thought he'd ghosted me. After 6 months, he reappears. I asked him where he'd been and he said, "I don't want to talk about it." A few weeks after, there was a fad where people were Googling their names and posting humorous stories they had found about similar people with their name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials, and I started to Google friends' names just out of boredom/morbid curiosity. Googled his name and found a local news story from his area. One of those crime in courts things, that he had been caught for statutory essay of a minor, online grooming, and had his computer and phone seized as evidence. Story 2. Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there since my car would hold more than he could take on a bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and on the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up, and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job, or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses that he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her really were just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked, never texted, never even emailed. Heck, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, and still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks a lot about until she showed up and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I make my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less, and I lost track of him after that. Wow! Talk about a Hail Mary. I mean, it sounds like he did have a plan, just not a good one. Story 3. This is way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made some friends with this guy from North Carolina. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which should probably have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now, there was no discussion or thought of relations, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy to see if he was funny and charming as he was online. Well, day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all of my college friends were 18 or 19. This guy was 24, or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long, greasy, pale blonde hair, except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die. Or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He did insist on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny twin college bed. Nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. Story 4. I don't know if it's a horror story, but it is how I ended up where I live now. I played World of Warcraft for years with a pretty regular group. Got to know them offline, and at one point, two of them, a couple, invited me to move across the country. At the time, I didn't have anything tying me to where I was, so I packed up and moved. Got out here, moved in with my friends, and everything seemed okay. My buddy was a long-haul driver, so he was always gone for days at a time. His girl would try to set me up multiple times with two of her friends at the same time, one in Minnesota. I ended up having a hard time finding work for a while. Finally got a job though and was putting some money away while helping watch their kids. Out of nowhere one day, my buddy accuses me of trying to fool around with his girl. Nothing had ever happened, but I had noticed her spending more and more time in my room when he wasn't there. I knew his history and his previous relationship had ended after she cheated with a friend of his. He wouldn't listen, so I got kicked out without any warning and they stole about $1,000 worth of my stuff and later moved. Ultimately, it all worked out for me, cut the friend and his girl out of my life completely and moved on. Now I have a good job here, wife, and kids. Story 5. After college ended, I was playing a game called EVE online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold crap in-game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend and had pictures of them rock climbing doing some super cool crap. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive, he called me and told me the job was no longer available and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. When I got there, I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people in a 1-bedroom apartment, and they had like 3 cats, which I'm allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1, it was all drugs and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a crap job to survive. I got one. It was crap. Day 3, my buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3, we actually move into a new apartment, and the first night in that apartment, he starts beating his smoking hot girl in front of their kid. The second time he beat her, I called the cops. Him and his girl immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other the way that they do. They had the cops escort me from the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's effing raining on all of my crap. Lars, you are a sack of crap and I hope you die of space herpes. Story 6. I used to play WoW with my now ex. Our guild leader actually wound up moving to our state with his wife. My ex and I broke up before we got the chance to hang out with the guy, and right after the breakup, he messaged my ex essentially asking if it was cool if he and his wife got me drunk and took advantage of me. X showed me screenshots when I was getting my stuff from his place, and I canceled my plans to meet the guy and his wife. My ex had been physically abusive and broke up with me to date the girl he'd cheated on me with. I tried leaving before, but he'd fake a self-unaliving attempt, and I was so scared he'd go through with it, so I stayed. Even though he was in a new relationship, he tried to keep tabs on me and control me, but I saw it as my chance to escape. I happened to move right after we split, and he didn't know my new address. I blocked him on everything. Somehow, he kept getting information on me though. Turns out the guild leader was feeding him everything. I hadn't deleted the guy off Facebook because I figured he was only a problem in person. When I confronted him over Messenger, bringing up the abuse, and the guy said, he said he choked you because you guys were arguing and he was afraid he wouldn't get the chance to speak. He still loves you. Side note, the choking was because I was defending myself against accusations of cheating, which I hadn't done. Story 7. I have been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their nose. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed. If he was just trying to sneak one out before I noticed, if he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guess maybe he was just so confident about himself and our friendship that he'd ascended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick bug. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car or the table or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, he was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could do to not throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say? Story 8. He and I were part of the same forum many, many years ago. He was dealing with his issues and I was dealing with mine. I think we both went there to escape where people wouldn't judge. Also, because we were bored. I'm not quite sure when we got properly talking. I think it's when he told a terrible joke about kipper ties. We used to share everything with each other over MSN. I'd give him advice about his love life and he'd listen to all my F-ups. It took quite a few F-ups before we eventually met up. I think I already knew we were in love, but seeing him in person really cemented it. We decided to give it a go, even though we lived 300 miles away from each other. We had a lot of ups and downs. I was distant. He lived with his ex-girlfriend for a bit, even though she didn't have a job and couldn't afford her half of the rent. The same ex-girlfriend who I'd given him advice on, who he had nicknamed Trouble and liked to claim she was pregnant every so often. We got over that somehow, along with many other things, and finally moved in with each other. I thought our issues were going to be solved when there was no distance between us. Turns out we were just very different people who wanted very different things, and the distance wasn't going to change that. We broke up after 3.5 years together. None of that's the horror story. Not the way he treated me, not the fact he probably cheated on me, not that I wasn't a priority and used to cry myself to sleep. About 1.5 years after breaking up, he gets back in touch and we talk like it was in the beginning, when we were friends. After a few weeks, he asked if I wanted to get back together. I said no. I told him that he'd broken my heart again. The next day, I got a phone call from his work because I was still his emergency contact asking me if I knew where he was because he hadn't turned up. The police got in touch too. The last phone call that day was from his mom to let me know he'd unalived himself. Story 9. A couple of years ago, this girl messaged me on Reddit saying she really connected with a comment I made about first seeing the ocean because she had just gone through a similar experience. She was going to come down to Chicago to visit a friend of hers and asked for suggestions of things to do. I gave her a bunch, and then we kept talking and finding out we had more and more in common. We eventually started talking over the phone and text messages, and when she came down, we went out for burgers and beer. We kept talking every day after that, and I was really starting to like her. She said she wanted to come down to Chicago again and if she could stay with me. I told her of course. And a few weeks later, she was here for Saturday and Sunday. Really, it was mostly Sunday because she got in late on Saturday and fell asleep on my couch. The next day, we went to the zoo and had a really amazing day. After that, we came back to my place and decided to go to the brewery nearby, which made a beer that had her name in it. We went there and then ended up bar hopping through until we ended up near a dive bar by my apartment. We drank and played pool there and eventually grabbed some to-go beers and headed back. I asked if she wanted to see the place by the river I like to go and drink and think. We sat and eventually started making out and decided to head back to my apartment. We hooked up and then the next day went to the south side to get breakfast at a place she really liked near her friend's apartment before she had to drive back. We kept talking after that and I was planning on coming up to visit her in Detroit. But then one day, she ghosted me out of nowhere. Not as horrible as some other stories, but it was really crappy for me because I actually really liked this girl. And to this day, I have no idea why she stopped talking to me. Edit. She's definitely not dead. We followed each other on Instagram, and I saw that she was okay a bit after she ghosted me. Story 10. It's not a horror story. It's a story about how I was put off meeting people from the internet. I was friends with a bunch of people I met through an online game. After about 2 years, I decided to meet 2 of them. The 2 I was meeting were a long-distance couple, one from one country and the other from mine. They had met many times and had spent 2 weeks together prior to meeting with me. We met in the city, said hi and hugged and did some touristy stuff, took their pictures, etc., etc. But throughout the whole time, they weren't really talking to me. At first, I put it down to anxiety as I was nervous too. But even after lunch, they were only talking to each other and I felt left out. I even took a sneaky video of them talking to each other and sent it to a friend who agreed it was odd. When it was time for me to leave, I told them I had to go, but I had a nice time and they continued to chat to each other. I said it again, but no response. So I started to walk away until one of them said, "Oh, bye." I was really hurt. It was like they didn't want me to be with them. I'd spent a lot of money getting down, especially since at the time I didn't have a job. When I got back, I stopped talking to them altogether. The friend who I sent the video to sent a message to them asking why they were ignoring me. And they tried to turn it on me, saying that I was the quiet one and that I was being rude to them, especially leaving without saying goodbye. I blocked them all on the game. A few months go by, and one of them finds my social media and tries to reconnect. Starts off well, and then goes back to blaming me. Haven't met anyone on the internet since. Story 11. I was on Meet Me. Met this guy who was super cool. We ended up texting every single day, and I took the train out to Los Angeles to meet him. When I got there, he was being kinda creepy, and he told me that he hadn't gotten much sleep because he was partying until 5 a.m. We walked to his house, and when I walked into his room, I was kind of shocked. It was an 8 by 6.5 room. All he had was a mat on the floor and a small little jewelry box full of mementos on top of his suitcase of clothes. We took a nap together. Later, we went to get ramen and he asked me to pay. I didn't mind. We went back to his place and we listened to music while we waited to go to a party. Fast forward to that night, we met up with some of his friends and they were so mean to him. They kept roasting him and picking on him and he was visibly getting upset. I stopped him for a bit so his friends could walk ahead of us. I reminded him that it was all fun and games and to ignore them. Ended up at the party and lots of people knew him. I sat out on the patio with a few cool people that I had just met while I waited for my friend to come back from saying hello to everyone inside. He never did. I was outside on the patio with these strangers for about 3 hours. People kept coming up to me and asking if I was alright. I don't know if I looked sad or if I just looked like a plain loner. I went to find him and it was so packed. Didn't see him, so I walked back. I saw his roommates and asked him to please tell my friend that I was going to go get a motel. He went to tell him, came back, and said my friend was being a loser and he would walk me back to the house instead, so I didn't have to spend money on a hotel. We got to the house and I thanked him for walking all the way back home. I really appreciated it as my friend was probably inside doing drugs or being with other girls. I went to bed in my friend's room and he woke me up in the middle of the night kissing me and trying to get his freak on. I simply said, "No, I'm not interested." His exact words were, "Are you serious? What was the point of you coming here? You're such a waste of time." My feelings were really hurt. I went back to sleep, woke up, and left. Never wrote him after that. He did text me a month later asking to borrow $50, but I simply ignored that. Story 12. Flashback 15 years ago. I was talking to a person I'd known for a few years. We weren't best friends, but we talked daily. Seemed like a nice guy. At some point he asked where I was from, and I mentioned that I lived in Philly, and I was going to the Art Institute there, living in the dorms. Didn't give specifics other than that. Most people knew I was an art student at the time. I posted about it regularly on LiveJournal. A few days later, I come home from class and see a message on AIM. "Figured out where you live. I'm outside of the dorms at the cafe across the street. Come meet me." This guy lived on the West Coast, and after finding out where I lived, he makes an unannounced trip across the country, tracked down the building where I lived in, and was camped out at the cafe across the street, asking him to meet him, all of this without any heads up. I immediately felt uncomfortable and didn't really know what to do. It's one thing to meet up, another thing entirely to make a trip across country and camp out in front of a person's residence. I didn't answer the AIM message right away and needed some time to calm down and think, get more rational. More messages started coming through, each reading slightly more hostile than the last. Okay, this guy traveled all this way, it'd be a loser move to ignore him, but at the same time, I felt like I was seeing red flags everywhere. I was legitimately creeped out. More messages came, and each time they started to get more agitated, more impatient. He started asking for my class schedule so he could meet me outside class, asking where I'd be going, where I usually ate, what time my dinner schedule was. He started getting weirdly specific about wanting to know every facet of my life. I was getting full-on stalker vibes, so I lied and told him that I was going to visit my sister and that I'd be back over the weekend. And I just missed him. That's when he said, "That's fine, I can wait." And he did. 3 days later, he's still there, still messaging me that he's still at the cafe, waiting. What the F are you waiting for? Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me you were coming? My privacy was having huge issues with all of this, and it got to the point I started feeling legitimately scared. I made a decision. Rather than meet him, I'd log out of AIM, create a new handle, pretend I never existed at that point. I completely abandoned my LiveJournal and started posting under a new name, and went so far as to change my entire online persona. I never heard from him again. Story 13. Back during WoW's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with, mostly through other friends. We talked more and more over time and became fairly close. He had this a-hole roommate, and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during the raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive too. I had my own apartment, so I said, you know what? come stay with me, just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe. He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and a laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them that he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off of. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him. I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her, I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. Story 14. I met two LiveJournal friends. I'll call them Adam and Betty. Adam came from the East Coast. Betty came from the West Coast. They met in the middle and vacationed in my state so all of us could hang out. Betty was fine, exactly the same IRL as she was on LiveJournal. Really pretty too. Adam though, oh my freaking gosh. The first night we met up, we were going to karaoke. Adam and Betty would drive to my house, meet my mom, and pick Twin and I up to go to the karaoke bar. Betty doesn't drink, so she'd drive the rental car. They knocked. I opened the door. Missy, my elderly terrier mutt who I love so much, immediately made friends with Betty. Betty walked all the way in, backing Missy up, and then Adam walked in. It was like a switch had flipped. Miss Dog lost her crap. She did the "I am going to kill you" bark, hackles raised, tail tucked between legs, snarling, snapping, and it sounded like she was screaming. Mom asked me to help get the dog under control and in the back room, so I did. Mom said she was worried about this guy, Adam, and wanted me to be careful. I said Missy was obviously freaked out about him too, so I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. So we went to the karaoke bar. Betty ordered pop. This was a non-issue as she was a devout Mormon and didn't drink. I ordered pop, and Adam immediately started trying to talk me into alcohol because he knows I drink. Hard nope, dude. Being young and naive, I said, maybe later. Rather than trying to pressure people to drink is a loser move, and it makes people think you're a creep, Adam. Twin, who was still presenting female at the time, ordered pop. This surprised me because he was going through a huge party phase. He spent most of his free time drunk. Adam started trying to talk Twin into alcohol too. No, I have a headache. Beer will make it worse. We did karaoke. It was unremarkable, and we went home. The next day, Betty flew home. She just changed her ticket and bounced. She gave us the details in a filtered LiveJournal entry saying that Adam wouldn't stop hitting on her and she didn't feel comfortable being in the same hotel as him. We all blocked him. Story 15. I had a guy profess his love for me over Skype. He wanted to come see me. He lived in the UK, I live in the States. Except I had a boyfriend at the time. I told him this. I told him that he was wasting his time and I have zero interest in him. He still was coming. I told him that there was no time to see him as I had to work and school. He says it's fine. He will wait until I have time to see him. I told him not to come. He says he has his parents' blessing. So he came. He stayed in a hotel for 3 weeks while I had to deal with finals, work, and spending time with my boyfriend. I hung out with him twice, once with a group of friends and once with my boyfriend. He got mad because he said that he wanted to hang out with just me, alone, in his hotel room, and when I said no, he flipped. He said that because he flew over here, I should at least hang out with him. He flew back home to the UK a few days later and blocked me on all social medias. Too long didn't read. Dude travels from the UK to profess his love for me, is upset that I didn't change my mind. Edit. Okay, I'll include some backstory. I knew him for about 3 years prior. He was a fairly popular streamer at the time, and I was one of his viewers. Eventually became a mod for him. We started talking on Discord and then Skype. I was 20 at the time of this event. Why did I even meet him? I knew him for a long time. I thought we were friends. I thought that he would come and realize I didn't have feelings for him if I said it to his face. I thought I could save the friendship. I never thought he would hurt me, but even then, I was never alone with him. Not even close. Yes, this is my GW account. No, it was not something I did while I talked to him. No, I never sent nudes nor did anything slightly inappropriate. Me showing off my body now does not mean I don't know how to make a good decision. Maybe not the decision you would have made, but still, you live and learn. Story 16. I, 25, was best friends with a woman, 46, for nearly 6 years. We would talk for hours and send each other gifts constantly. We shared everything, art to personal trauma. We were very close. When I fell in hard times, she was very kind and offered to take me in. I was so grateful that she would do this for me. After a few months, things started to change. I started to see why she was such a lonely person. She was mean, if not cruel, to anyone who ever disagreed with her or even had a different opinion. She was so mentally unstable that she couldn't even buy something without having to call her elderly mother and ask for permission. I found out that she was scamming the disability services to get money from the government because she didn't want her mother tracking her spending. She was so horrible to her caregiver. I'll admit that the guy was a complete moron, but he was still a sweet guy that was just trying to help. She was so abusive towards him that I had to step in on multiple occasions, which she effing hated because it meant that I wasn't on her side. That's when she turned on me. She began to freak out over small stuff, screaming and crying because I missed a spot while mopping, or because I spilled a little bit of water in the kitchen or ate my food too fast. She was effing insane. As soon as I realized how messed up and unstable she was, after being screamed at and chased back to my room, I told her that I was going to be moving out as soon as possible. So, for the next week, she decided to make my life a living nightmare. She would scream about me to other people on the phone, telling lies about me, saying I did things I never did. And because she was a YouTuber with a big following, she doxed me on social media, telling people I punched holes in her walls and keyed her car. She even called the cops and tried to get me arrested for things I didn't do. Her followers began to harass me, sending me essay and death threats. Then she started posting and sharing all of my personal secrets that I had shared with her in confidence. I ended up having to call my family to come get me because she was wanting to keep my dog so that I would have to keep in contact with her, and I was no longer feeling safe. So, after 6 months of living in this heck and 3 years of internet harassment and stalking that followed, I'll never meet someone I met online ever again. I have no interest in online friends. It's not safe because you never know how absolutely effed up someone is until it's too late. Story 17. I was the horror in this story. I was part of an online writing community that I really enjoyed, and I made a lot of good friends through the years. One man and his wife were visiting from another country, so another guy from my area and I were going to take them to dinner and have a nice in-person evening with sightseeing and conversation. Things kind of blew up for me at that time. My now ex-husband and I were having major issues, and I was near my mental and emotional breaking point. I had lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks just from pure stress. On top of that, my family had chosen that evening to have a get-together for my uncle who would soon be traveling to undergo surgery for cancer. I showed up in body, but that was basically it. My mind was a million miles away. I wasn't talkative at all, and I left after about an hour. I feel like I lost 3 good friends that evening because of my behavior at dinner and my subsequent withdrawal from the whole community. I'm sure they look back on that evening and think what a nightmare host I was. Story 18. I never actually met him, but I used to play RuneScape when I was younger, around 11ish. I didn't pay for the member account, so there was a bunch of items and things I couldn't get. Some members started gifting me things, and I was super grateful. Every time I went on, he would help me with my quests and whatever. But over time, he started asking more personal questions, like what I looked like, what I liked to do, etc. In return, he told me his first name, that he was 14, and that he was in the army as some cadet program or something, but back visiting family, blah blah blah. I knew nothing about the army. A cadet program at that age didn't sound that far-fetched to little old me. He started to escalate how he was talking to me and started sending me messages like, "Hi sexy, miss you, come back and talk to me babe," etc. I stopped replying because I was creeped out and was 11. I still thought boys were gross, period. Anyway, in school the next day, I was making small talk with a girl I sat next to, and she mentioned how her brother was home and how much she'd missed him while he'd been away in the army. I got a sinking feeling then, which continued when she told me his name, a match. In desperation, I asked her if he ever played RuneScape, in which she said he did, and his username was friend's username. She showed me a picture and told me how she was really excited about how he'd finally found his calling in the army. Except, dude was 26 years old. Story 19. Oh, finally, I have somewhere to tell this story, but it's probably too late to get any real traction. Long story short, when I was doing a lot of online dating, I had multiple accounts across multiple platforms. One happened to be FetLife. I used pictures there that I hadn't put online before, with my face cropped out. It didn't pan out, however. I didn't really like any of the guys that messaged me. I was polite to them all, but ultimately kind of abandoned my profile. Cue Tinder. I matched with a guy that looks white collar, tailored, professional, just my type. We match, talk for a week or so until we decide to get drinks. I get to the bar, took an Uber there, and look around. I don't see him until this scraggly looking guy comes up to me and says, "Oh, hey, Grenadine Garden. I thought you'd never make it." Now, I'm not usually one to judge by appearances. We all have rough days, and Lord knows I don't wear makeup or do my hair on the busiest of them. But his hair was significantly longer. Think short, well-manicured hair versus mid-back length, uncombed waves. He was covered in a patchy beard and dressed really badly. I honestly didn't recognize him, and he waved it off with, "Sorry, those pictures are kind of old." Red flag, stupidly ignored. We grab a small table with a huge chair and start drinking and talking. One drink, just to be polite, but I'm turned off at this point, wholly. Then the kicker. He leans in towards me, puts his hand on my thigh and says, "You know, after you didn't message me back on FetLife, I'm surprised we matched on Tinder. You really are quite beautiful." At this point, I'm like, "I'm sorry?" He chuckles, literally chuckles like a villain in a movie, pats my thigh and says, "I'm going to the bathroom. You should look at your profile and figure it out. I found you because your body is quite distinct." It's worth noting we live in a major international tourist city. There are thousands upon thousands of new people here every day, especially on Tinder. This is not a small town. I used to match with people that would swipe between connecting flights, so I'm beyond nervous. Watch him get up and go, and I quickly check my FetLife inbox, and lo and behold, he had messaged me months ago. His profile picture looked like an absolute serial unaliver. I remember why I rejected him. Incompatible on all fronts, and I was polite. So anyways, I got to use the whole angel shot protocol, in which I basically ran to the bartender, explained the situation, and left through the back door. I was beyond uncomfortable and deleted all of my social media for a few months, and I consider myself lucky that he only sent a few "you're a loser" messages for the rest of the evening, but gave up after that. And I paid for my own drink too. I'm not a monster. Story 20. I met a guy through Match.com. After countless exchanges, we went on a date. He showed up handsome, well-dressed, and successful. We went to a beautiful French restaurant. During dinner, he claimed to feel bad and asked if we could not talk, then proceeded to ask for the check right after the entrees arrived. I asked for the waiter to box my meal. When we got into his car, he said, "Let's go to my house, have coffee, and listen to music." I said, "No thank you, and please take me home." He drove in the opposite direction. After a 5-minute argument, we went to the Starbucks for coffee, and he yelled at me because he couldn't smoke in the cafe. Just then, a friend texted and invited me to her party a few miles away. I figured this was my way out. I asked him to go with me. We were there for about an hour, and he said he was ready to leave. I told him I was staying. He said, "You're not leaving with me?" I told him no. He then slapped me across the face in a room full of my friends, and no one saw it. I was shocked. He leaned in an inch from my face and said, "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" He turned around and walked out. He then continued to leave me harassing messages, calling me names, and stalked me for the next 3 months. He'd show up at places he knew I would be. He would call me from other numbers and cry and ask me to go to counseling with him. He finally stopped, and it ruined online dating for me forever. Story 21. I was probably the horror of the story. Posted this before, and for what it's worth, I'm not proud of what I did. Met a girl my age in a chat room when I was 16. We'd talk every day, and things got serious in a puppy love kind of way. I'd only ever seen one picture of her, which was in black and white, but when she floated the idea of coming to spend the week with her whilst her parents were away, I booked a ticket and traveled several hours on the train to go see her. She was waiting for me when the taxi pulled up, and my heart sank. She looked a lot heavier than her picture suggested, and I wasn't attracted to her at all. To top it off, the house I had to spend the next week smelled like dog. For some reason, we put Lethal Weapon 4 on for us to watch, and it was during the film that I decided I'd probably made a mistake and had to leave as soon as I could. The next day probably would have been too soon, so I decided on the day after next. The part I'm least proud of is sneaking into her room before my taxi arrived and erasing my number in her phone. Then, only realizing that the majority of the messages in her phone were from me and that she'd still have my number. I snuck back into her room and deleted all those messages. The taxi came and I went home and never spoke nor heard from her again. Not a nice thing to do at all. I'm sorry, Emily. You deserved so much better. Story 22. Sorry in advance. This is a long one. I was talking to this girl I met on Quizilla back in 2008-2009. We met because she made one of those "which Twilight characters are you?" quizzes, and I was asking for help on making mine. We got to talking and realized that we were roughly the same age, lived in the same state only a couple hours apart, and had quite a few things in common. Fast forward a few months, I start thinking of her as one of my genuine best friends, and we start to broach the subject of meeting IRL. My parents, understandably, have their doubts, and only agree to let me meet her if I agree to bring my older brother along. I was 13, he was 18. I agree, and the girl and I arrange to meet at a museum that is equidistant from both of us. So the day comes, and it's time for me to finally meet this girl I've been talking to for a solid 6 to 7 months. My brother agrees that he's not going to breathe down my neck, but that I'll always be within eyeshot. I see her at the entrance when I walk up, and everything seems to be going well. After all, she's not an 80-year-old man, and she looks exactly like her pictures, which is really all that I could possibly expect from the situation. Later on in the day, my brother meets up with us so that he could drive us somewhere to get lunch, and everything immediately went downhill from there. This was the first time my brother had really seen her up close and not from a few meters away, and he gets a really confused look on his face. He doesn't react further, but stays pretty much quiet the rest of the drive. I think nothing of it and just assume that he's letting us talk and doesn't want to interrupt. When we get to the restaurant, she doesn't want to sit on my side of the booth with me, instead choosing to sit next to my brother. She claims that this is because she wants to be able to look at me while she's talking, but my brother is looking more and more uncomfortable with the situation. I decide to sit next to him instead and don't really give her an option. Suddenly, the conversation starts to drift from me and her to just about my brother, what he does for school, where he works, his friends, etc. I start getting really jealous and eventually blow up saying, "Are you here to talk to me or just my brother?" She starts backpedaling and apologizes for ignoring me. At that moment, my brother finally realizes that he recognizes her as a girl that had been stalking him on MySpace for the past few months, but without all the terrible filters and makeup and angles that he was used to seeing her with. He immediately gets super freaked out and starts saying that we need to leave and that she needs to find her own way home. We end up leaving as soon as her parents come to pick her up, and I never hear from her again. And that's the story of how my junior high online best friend was also my brother's weird MySpace stalker. Needless to say, he still brings it up to this day and uses it against me at every opportunity. Story 23. Met a girl online once. Can't remember where, but this was 15 to 20 years ago. We chatted for a while and seemed to hit it off. Eventually, she invited me to her house. Turns out she was having a party with about 30 people. She pretty much ignored the whole time I was there, hung out with some cool people, and played some Mario Kart. Left when everyone else started to, and never spoke to her again. I have a lot of online communities I'm involved in between some forums I'm active in and Final Fantasy IX. I wasn't there for it, but a bunch of my Final Fantasy friends got together one weekend 10 to 15 years ago. One of them got drunk off his butt, trashed some stuff, and made everyone else miserable. He never got invited again. The most prominent one was where I got cock-blocked by 9/11. I had a trip across country I lined up for a car show and met up with a bunch of people from a forum I was on. I had been talking to a girl out there for months beforehand and it had gotten pretty hot and heavy. So I planned to go out for a show, then hang out with her for a week or so after that. I also had some work to do there, but it was mostly to hang out with her. 9/11 happened the Tuesday before the trip. I ended up on one of the first flights out of town that Thursday. 90% of the groups canceled their trips though. When I landed, she sent someone else to pick me up and she was nowhere to be found. I saw her at the show for about 5 minutes, but besides that, she ghosted me. I heard from her a few days after. Her ex and her had gotten back together after 9/11 happened because life is short, let's try it again, etc. I spent most of the trip in my hotel room watching the first X-Men movie on HBO. It was a surreal experience all around. They're not all horror stories though. Through the same group I made friends with another girl out of state. We hung out a few times but figured out we'd click better as friends. I met her best friend on one of my trips and we started talking online constantly. She flew down one weekend to see how we'd get along in person. We've been married 14 years just about, so I guess it worked out. Story 24. Okay, so I never really met them in person, but I'm so relieved I didn't. Also, this is a long story. Too long didn't read. I really dodged a bullet by not meeting up with these people because they got extremely creepy and expected me to be a cheerleader despite being 14 to 15 years old. So, when I was a freshman in high school, my parents finally got me my own computer. I downloaded Gmod, because, that was the big thing at the time. There, I met my first and last online group. There were like 12 of us, and I was one of 3 girls. The ringleader of sorts was this one guy who was a senior in high school. For this story, I'm going to call him Joe, not his real name. Now, at the time, my parents were extremely overprotective of me online, as my mother saw the online world as an absolute evil, and my dad just went along with what she said because he didn't know much about the platform. So I wasn't allowed to show my face. I couldn't use my real name, and if I played with multiple people, one of my parents had to be in the room so they could make sure I didn't accidentally let any personal information slip. No one in the group even knew how old I was. They assumed I was older because at the time I had a deep voice for a 14-year-old girl. They assumed I was in college because of this. Well, fast forward about a month, and the group went from using no cameras at all to always using face cams, and even just calling on Skype instead of gaming at all. For a while, they were okay with me not revealing my face, but they assumed I was just shy or self-conscious. It wasn't until then that I accidentally let it slip that I was in high school, complaining about a teacher that hated me because I stood up for a girl with a fake learning disability, and then everyone wondered if it was a good idea to keep me there, as most of them were either seniors in high school or older. Now, Joe wasn't the oldest, he was a senior in high school himself, but he was the ringleader, so it was up to him whether or not I stayed. He said it was fine, as he had been part of this particular group since he was in middle school. Now, I'm not exactly sure when this happened because I was kept out of the loop on a lot of things. I was told about this by Joe's friend way after it happened. But Joe and one of the girls, I'll call her Belle, got into a huge argument. Apparently, Belle had a huge crush on Joe, but he wasn't interested. And this exploded into most of the group getting involved because Belle was being immature about it and decided to vent to everyone. When Belle found out that I knew she got rejected, she then started to vent to me about stuff she didn't like about Joe. He's a slob, he shows too much favoritism, etc., etc. Why? I don't know. Maybe to save face or to make me hate him? I really don't know. I was a freshman and I didn't understand a relationship drama of any kind. About a week after I found out about everything, Belle called me and told me to stop flirting with Joe. Now, here's the thing. I hadn't been flirting with anyone, especially in the group that knew that I was not interested in dating, that I was a bit young to date, again I was a freshman, and they all knew that my parents heavily monitored my internet usage. Again, I couldn't even show my face. No matter what I told her though, she wouldn't listen. From here, things get a bit weird, at a scarily fast speed. I didn't tell Joe about Belle's interrogation, but everyone found out. The group basically banned all girls except me. The other girl took Belle's side and went on a similar tirade. And the guys assured me that nothing would be different now that the girls were banned. Boy, that was a lie. Suddenly, instead of girls joining the group to game, random girls would join the Skype calls for like 2 gaming sessions, leave, then be replaced for another 2 gaming sessions. I also realized that these girls never actually played with us, they just kind of flirted with the guys and encouraged them while they played. I started to get weirded out by this because, this was not what I had agreed to join when I first started playing. I slowly started to pull away from the group and Joe noticed. So he asked me if I wanted to have a cheerleader for myself. Joe was the second person I told I was bi. I not so politely declined, as I thought it was extremely disgusting. I reminded him that I was a minor, and he said that he knew girls my age that would love me. I again declined. He asked me to turn my webcam on. Come on, your parents won't know if you turn your camera on and then just open up the gaming window. But I refused, as I was scared of what would happen if my parents ever found out, which upset him a good bit. He then said that he didn't want me to play, but would love for me to be his cheerleader, which would require me to use my webcam. I declined and basically cursed him out as best as I could. Again, my parents were kinda within earshot, and the other guys each asked me at some point or another to be their cheerleader. And one guy found out we live in the same state and asked if I wanted to hook up with him. He was 17 at the time. I was so disgusted by all of this, so I left. This experience wasn't the only reason I haven't joined another gaming group, but it is definitely a major factor. I was told later by the third girl that had left with Belle years later that it was best I left because Belle came back, and she and Joe have apparently blocked everyone that was in the group and began to date about a year after I left. So yeah. Sorry it was so long. Edit. So I don't know much of the details about the girls and how and why they were there. This was years ago when I was kept out of the loop because I was the only girl. The best reason I can give for them being there is that none of the guys really had any girlfriends, probably because of their attitudes and behavior, and having girls around to boost their egos and flirt made them feel better? I don't know, I just know it happened. Story 25. I met someone on ICQ back around 2000. He was my online boyfriend, because that was a thing back then. There was a few times we wouldn't talk for a few years, but every time we started again, it was like no time had ever gone by. Back then he lived in Canada. East Coast. I lived in the US, West Coast. He slowly moved closer to the West Coast as the years went by. Back in 2015 or 2016, he was coming down into the States for work and decided to stop by so we could finally meet. We had dinner. It was weird but oddly familiar. Pretty cool meeting someone you've been talking to for 15 years. Later, we go back to my place and hang out for a bit. Decide to go out to a bar that I frequented at that time. I told him nothing too crazy because I had to wake up early the next morning. I can't remember now what it was, work or something else. But as soon as we got to the bar, he pounded 2 beers. Can't remember the rest. I started to distance myself throughout the night, and he kept disappearing outside throughout the night, but he ended up getting kicked out. I was super embarrassed because this was my bar, my friends, and he just totally disrespected everyone. We walk back to my place. I set him up on the couch and go to bed. It was summer, so it was super hot, and the only AC was in my room. I'd like to think the next part was due to it being so hot, but he came into my room in the middle of the night and got into my bed naked. I slept out in the hot living room. Few hours later, I left to go do whatever it was I was doing, and I texted him that he needed to be out by the time I got back. I remember I stayed out a little longer because I didn't want to see him. He was gone by the time I got back, thank God. He kept texting me for about a week, asking what he did wrong and that he was sorry. I texted him once, telling him he disrespected me and my home and my friends, and if he didn't remember, that wasn't on me. I didn't want to talk to him. I haven't talked to him since. Looking back on it, he was a raging alcoholic. I would get late-night voicemails from him while he was drunk. I remember one in particular, because he was walking home and fell or something and was yelling at cars, I think. Totally belligerent. It's kinda sad. I hope he got help. Getting involved with an addict was something I never wanted and wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. I immediately cut ties with a few addicts. Except my current boyfriend. I never figured out why I gave him a chance, but I did. Sorry for my random tangent. Done. Story 26. I was 17 or 18. Dude, 25 or so. Was a friend I'd known through a group on Yahoo chat rooms for probably 4 or 5 years by that point. He and his long-term on and off girlfriend had broken up around the same time I broke up with an online boyfriend for cheating on me. So we had been sharing our sorrows. Totally platonic. Nothing romantic was ever mentioned. He actually knew about my mom's mental health condition too, and that I was uncomfortable around people with the same issue because she was super abusive to me, and the mannerisms are a PTSD trigger for me. This is relevant. One day he says, "I'm coming up to my city for the weekend so we can hang out." I felt pretty blindsided because he hadn't said anything ahead of time, let alone asked me about it, and had no reason to come to my state, which was a good 2-day bus trip, but I was too polite to tell him no. I picked him up from the bus station and dropped him at his hotel and then had to go to work, thankfully. I knew from that car ride that I didn't want to be around him in person because it was pretty instantly clear to me he had the same mental health condition my mom had. That alone made me super uncomfortable. But we also had nothing to talk about in person, and it was pretty clear he had come up with romantic intentions. I saw him for about 2 hours the next day and then lied and said I had to work again. He suggested I could stay the night in his hotel. I declined. He got back to the bus station on his own. After a week or so of silence, he actually apologized for his behavior, which I appreciated, but he never quite got back on the right foot. Looking back, I know it could have been much worse, but at the time it felt terrifying and dangerous. Story 27. When I was about 30 and living in New York City, a girl on OkCupid started messaging me. She said she was 21, a student at NYU, and was into anime and all sorts of other wonderful nerdiness. I should mention I am part Asian, so online dating would get all the weeaboos. But what was strange was her pictures looked like a model. It seemed like there was no way this redheaded model contacted me out of the blue. We started texting, she'd text me all the time, and started sending pictures of her cat, her shoes, her fingernails, never a full shot of her. And then she started calling me. We would actually have great conversations, and it seemed like some parts of her stories were true. She shared an apartment with other girls and she would interact with them, and I would hear them talk back during our conversations. However, the pictures of the redhead she sent me in the photo properties were pictures several years old, so definitely not her. I even had a female friend point out her fingernails were rounded but the redheads were squared as evidence. Anyway, I pushed to meet her and she disappeared. The strangest part of the story was I would talk about this mystery, sometimes on other dates, and one of them had previously dated a writer, an Asian guy, and shared with me a short story he wrote about his experience with the same girl. That redhead contacted him, started texting, calling, etc., then disappeared forever. It's almost Monty Teo all over again. Story 28. Nowhere near as bad as the others on this post, but we used to have this Skype group for certain people that liked a certain show about colorful horses, so we could talk about the show and art and make friends in general. Somehow managed to find people that actually lived pretty locally to me, so we arranged a day that we would meet up. Me and two guys, we'll call them Johnny and Joseph. I was about 18 at the time, so I figured I would be fine going without one of my other girlfriends to stick to me. The initial meetup was great. We talked and walked and just sort of enjoyed the time. Eventually, Johnny went home because it was already getting late, so Joseph and I walk around some more, just chatting normally. We are walking really far away. I don't know the area, but apparently he does, so we just go. Soon I need to pee, so I ask Joseph if he knows somewhere I can go to use the bathroom. He tells me his house is nearby, so we can drop by there. I'm kind of getting desperate at this point, so I agree. It takes about 5 minutes to walk to his place. It's in a pretty dodgy area, so I'm pretty spooked already at this point. I go to the bathroom and he tells me he will be in the room 2 doors down. So when I finish up in the bathroom, I go to find him. It's his bedroom and he's on the computer. "Do you want to watch me play TF2? He says to me. I say okay, as long as it's not too long because it's getting dark outside. I watch him play and my anxiety is just through the roof. He then puts on some horror game knowing full well, because we discussed it earlier, that I'm terrified of horror games. So not only am I anxious, but I am scared crapless and on the verge of tears. I ask again, a bit more sternly. I'm a shy coward, so speaking up like this is really out of character for me. "Can I go home now?" No joke now. Dude turns around and asks, "Do you want to make out?" At this point, I'm completely speechless and am frozen in place. Dude has some protection on the bed just ready, like as if he was expecting me to say yes before I even came to the room. Of course, I just say, no, and walk my way out of that situation. I'm so glad it didn't go further than that because, it really could have been worse. The walk home was really scary too. It was dark, and after that I decided I was never going to meet people without someone else there ever again. Story 29. So not an actual horror story, as it ended well, but still gave me quite a turn. I'd been email buddies / pen pals with this girl since she was 15 and I was 19. When I was about 25, I was staying with my dad and stepmother, and it was a really crappy living situation as my stepmom is a full-blown entitled narcissist and my dad an enabler. I basically paid them $150 a month to live in a flea-filled corner that was freezing in winter and boiling in summer. Because of this, and trying to avoid my stepmother, I'd wake up every day and go to the library for as long as I could and work on my manuscripts and study. Literally nothing but a blizzard or thunderstorm or the library being closed kept me home. I turned into a complete workaholic because I hated being in that house. So one day, while at the library working away, I keep getting messages from my online friend asking what I was up to. I told her I was working. She kept asking if I wasn't at home. I told her twice, nope. I couldn't figure out why she asked. It turned out she had secretly hopped on a plane and shown up at my parents' house. She was like, "Hey, I'm Celestina's friend. Can I use your bathroom?" Which, given what stuck-up losers they are, is super hilarious to picture. It would be like if one of Harry Potter's wizard friends showed up at the Dursley house. And in all the time I'd lived with them, I never had friends, was always alone. Bit of a nasty shock for them, I imagine. But the girl was persistent, and next thing I know, she's got my dad escorting her through the library to meet me. LOL. She's awesome like that. I did get in a lot of trouble as everybody assumed I'd planned her visit, despite the fact that I knew nothing about it, but otherwise it was a great time. Also, I knew she was going to be loads of fun from the minute I stood up from the library desk and she gasped, "Oh my gosh, you are short!" And I was all, yeah, horror story for my folks at any rate. Story 30. Not me, but a friend of mine met someone on the internet when we were fresh out of middle school. The guy he was talking to online claimed to be the same age as us and wanted to hang out sometime. So my friend invites me to tag along, and I warn him that's not a good idea because it could be someone dangerous pretending to be a kid. We fought and argued, and I was eventually forced to tag along to meet up with this online person. So we show up, and this guy is in his 40s. He walks up to my friend and greets him. Then the guy looks at me and seductively licks his lips, grinning like he's looking at fresh meat or something. I backed away as slowly as I could, and the guy touches me and says, "Don't go, I just want to talk." My friend is all warm and friendly with the guy and chats to him like a normal person. So after a few minutes or so, my friend and I leave, and the strange thing is, he still wants to be friends with the online guy. A month goes by and I get a strange email asking for some personal info. I decline many times and the guy goes apecrap on me, complaining about how I'm being rude. He sends me some inappropriate content and I blocked him on my email. A few days later, he finds my personal Facebook and sends me a friend request. I have no idea how he found me and I decline the request. Again, he goes apecrap on me and rants about how if I don't add him as a friend, he'll make my life a living nightmare. I ignore it. Next thing I know, my Facebook friends stopped talking to me because he's been harassing them trying to get my personal info. I had enough with this guy and I do some research. Next thing I know, I learn he's a convicted offender. I confront the guy online about this and he says that an ex of his framed him for a crime he didn't do. I call BS on it and I warned him, if he talks to me again, I'll report him to the police. Fat Body here doesn't get the big picture, so he continues to message me with sexual messages like, how big is your chicken? And are you gay? Have you done anything weird? And other strange questions. Keep in mind this goes on and on for a while. I had enough and I report the guy to the police. Police ask for evidence. I pull out the chat to see that the guy has been deleting his Facebook messages. Anyways, I report him to Facebook and his account gets deleted a day later. Few days later, he makes another Facebook account and sends me another friend request. I don't bother replying to his messages and report him to Facebook again. A month later, he sends me a new friend request on his third Facebook account. I report him to Facebook once again. His account is deleted. Have I won this battle? Close. So I take a break from Facebook and spend some time on Twitter. Little did I know he has a Twitter account and followed me and sent a series of messages to me over a long period of time. Normally I don't read DMs, but I deleted all of the messages and blocked him on Twitter. I tried reporting him to Twitter, but they don't do anything about it. His Twitter is still active. Fast forward to 2 years ago, my IRL friend calls me sobbing. I ask, what's wrong? He apologizes for dragging me with him to meet the online guy. He says he should have listened to me and how it was wrong to chat with the guy online in the first place. To make matters worse, he says the online guy has been calling him, saying some very messed up things to him now. Anyways, I tell him to report online person to the police. Friend says he's too scared because no one will believe him. I tell my friend to block the number and just ignore him. So in the end, my friend unfriends the online guy, and to this day, we haven't heard a peep from him. Story 31. This almost was me. Almost. Long story time. I am an artist, and my main job before the one I had now was selling my work at comic, anime, and video game cons across the US and Canada, and sometimes in more countries. It was surprisingly a lucrative job if you did it right, and I enjoyed it, and required a lot more work than people realized. But I digress. The point is, I was familiar with the convention scene, and this leads me to my next point. I used to take commissions at conventions, but I stopped doing them years ago because I got too busy and my art had improved enough that $100 felt too low for my skill level. And I'm all about artists pricing their work fairly and not working for pennies. A couple of years ago, just as I had started phasing out commission work, a man had approached me at a con. You get a lot of socially awkward people at cons, to be expected, but 99.5% of them are really sweet and just like to talk about stuff that they dig. If you have a good amount of patience, it's enjoyable. But this guy, he immediately asked me if I did commissions. I said no, unfortunately not anymore. He asked me how much my prices were, and usually when people ask, I just quote some arbitrary high number just to get them to throw out the idea without outright telling them no. And if they want to pay it, well, then we can talk. I said $350. He said, cool, done. In cash? I was stammering at him, not expecting him to go for it. Eventually, I just asked him what he wanted. To make a long story shorter, he wanted furry art. Softcore adult content to be exact. I had never in my life done furry art, but I knew how lucrative it seemed to be. I said, oh, each character would be extra, and FW would be extra too. This would be a big commission. He's like, oh, no worries. How much extra? This went back and forth for a while, and to save time, he paid me $700 in cash on the spot for some furry adult content. I wasn't even mad. $700 is nice. So I said, sure, I'll try the furry adult content. What do I care? I'll fake sign it. It's one and done. After I did it, and one night in my hotel room, I found he had taken my business card and had given my email to his friends who may be interested in commissioning art. The requests were weirder and weirder, but the pay stayed surprisingly good. Eventually, I ended up making a Fur Affinity account under a fake name and tweaked my style and techniques enough that no one could ever trace the art back to me. I decided to just fully embrace the furry art bank life. It was open season. I guarantee you I was a no-name in that community and still made good money, so I'm horrified to think what the really popular artists get. I didn't feel ashamed for drawing weird furry fetish adult content, nor did I feel bad for kinda being a fraud. I provided a service, and that was it. Things went downhill when I mistakenly befriended someone in the community. She was another furry artist, and we just sort of hit it off in the online community. She seemed like an edgy, self-hating furry, so our jabbing humor at the expense of furries made us bond. She was cool, all was well. Eventually, I admitted to her that I didn't actually give a crap about furries, and she took it in stride. Said she understood why I used the community to make money because she wished she wasn't an effing furry either. But you can't help what you look like. She told me that if I really wanted to make bank, I should go to a furry convention. I was immediately like, F no, never in my life. But she told me about an anime con that I regularly attended that next year would be sharing the same venue and weekend as a furry convention. Just table hop, she said. She told me to split her table with her, try it out, and see how I fared. I already had a table at the anime con, so I was like, sure, why the heck not? What could it hurt? We decided to even share a hotel room. This isn't uncommon. In artist alleys, many artists' rooms share together since we have similar schedules and don't tend to party hard because we are working. She seemed like a good person, and it's not uncommon to just meet someone IRL when you're rooming with them. I arrived Thursday, before the con, but the furry con had already started. I got a text from my friend to come sit at her table in the FurryCon dealer's den for a few hours, since my con didn't start until Friday, just to see if it clicked. She had already checked into the hotel room and had the keys anyways, so I picked up my badge and went. I was surprised to find her at the table, in full fursuit. That was the weird part. She was a self-hating furry, or so she claimed, so to go full commitment and be in a suit was, okay, I was already out of my comfort zone in the sea of furries, and my friend was supposed to be like my anchor, my guide through this other world to protect me from this crap. I was immediately on edge. It got worse when I sat down and introduced myself, and she did that thing that furries do where they are in their fursuits and don't talk. She nodded when I made sure she was who I thought she was, but she just did the overly exaggerated cute poses and even had an effing squeaky toy in her fursuit to make noise. But she didn't say a word. She hugged me and somehow managed to interact with customers who all knew her and or adored her. I guess she was well known in the community. And if she wanted to communicate, would write, or text in this big freaking stupid thing. She said she hates wearing suits, but because she doesn't have to talk in them, she doesn't have to interact much with customers. Okay, that I could kind of maybe believe, sort of. At around 7 p.m., we packed up to leave and go to the hotel room. She stayed in the suit the whole way up. In the room, I flopped down on my bed exhausted. I then asked her if she was going to come out of that thing, understandably a little freaked out from this whole thing. Then she did the thing that made me want to run out of the room, which I didn't, against my better judgment. I'd flopped on the bed with the upper half of my body, my feet still on the floor. My shirt had ridden up my torso. She stepped in between my legs and effing tickled me on my exposed belly. I flipped the F out, as one does when sneak attacked by tickles, and wriggled out of her reach. She made that laughing pose that furries do where they hold their paws through their mouths bashfully but still silent as F. I was so creeped out. My go-to way of handling stress like that is laughing it off nervously. She got the hint and motioned she was going to get a shower. As soon as she was in the shower, I decided I didn't want to be there when she got out, for now. But instead of lugging all my stuff, I decided I would come back for it, preferably with friends, but I needed a key. So I went to her wallet she had taken out of one of her suit pockets and tried to find the keys I had seen her slip into her wallet. And of course, as soon as I opened it, I just had to see her ID. I just had to. I was too curious not to. And when I opened it, I looked at the ID slot and I flipped. My crap. Whoever was in that ID was not in any way who I was expecting to see on that picture. I don't know the super personal details of my friends besides her name and age and general descriptive factors. Mid-20s, white girl, etc. That was not who was on this ID. It was a man with long, greasy hair, glasses, and stubble in his mid-40s or early 50s, I'd wager. I was so effing shocked that I literally threw the wallet across the room after grabbing a key and ran the F out of that hotel room. I took 15 flights of stairs down to the lobby and called up a friend who was coming to the con, freaking out. I never saw the real person under the suit. My friend, a tall, burly, scary-looking dude, went up to my stuff later that night with the key I'd grabbed. When he came back with all my things, he said there was no one in the room. I stayed with him in his room that weekend and kept only to the convention my friend didn't have a badge to get into, unless I was with a group outside of it. The next night, I deleted my Fur Affinity account, blocked my friend on my chat app, and deleted every connection I had to the furry world. Money be danged! I would never venture into that mess again. To this day, that event still makes me sweat, man. I have some really awful, funny, and silly con stories from my time as a traveling con artist, and this and one other incident top the list as the worst I have still not recovered. And that was how I almost became like the OP in the image, but got out just in time, I hope, before anything terrible happened. Story 32. So, I got catfished once. I was 15. Used this app/virtual chat world called IMVU on the PC. I was a pretty sheltered kid, still very hopeful and naive about the world, but I loved helping people. One day I'm on there and I meet this girl named Morrow. She was the real gothic type and I was really into alternative girls. We started chatting every day. Eventually I met her brother Justin and her close friend Norma. We all chatted on this IMVU website. Sometimes played games on stream, hung out over Skype. It was pretty great. I even started dating Morrow. So, after dating for about a year, she hits me with some weird crap about her being a vampire and how she's over 2,000 years old. Basically the vampire from those Christopher Pike novels. Now, to preface here, this was around the time Twilight got big. Vampires were all the rage and I was super naive, so I still believed that almost anything could be possible. Maybe. So I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, especially when her brother and friend are saying, yeah, she's totally a vampire, and treated it as if it were some big family secret. I know, effing stupid in retrospect, but I was young and really naive. Fast forward a couple years, I'm 17, still dating her and believing she is a vampire with a long history and a family. Even believed that maybe I'd talked to God about it because of another set of circumstances in which a random number texted me and I asked about these things. And the other texty or texter, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, the person who texted me seemed to understand all of this stuff that I was hiding from basically everyone I knew, because I knew on some level that it all sounded crazy as F. The short of it was I was just willing to believe, and I loved Morrow. I was in my first year of college down in Tennessee at this point, and I decided I was going to finally meet Morrow in person. Only one problem. She lived in Montana, hence why I hadn't met her up to this point. Although we had exchanged pictures throughout our relationship, I'd even gotten supposed pictures of all of her and her said family together, so I used my savings to move out to Montana, but I was supposed to be moving with her 24-year-old brother Justin. I wouldn't be able to see her for several more months due to her taking a long trip to India to visit her ancestral vampire roots. Again, I know it sounds insane, but you see where this is going. Eventually, we move in with other people. They helped me to figure out that Justin was the only one who ever existed. I was 18 at this point, so I had spent 3 years believing in this whole interconnected network of at least 8 people by now, but it turns out old Justin had been pulling the strings the whole time. Just keeping up the charade, finding pictures online, and using all these different fakes to gang up against me when I'd start to question things. I began to put the pieces all together, so I kicked him out of my house, and that's when he decided to tell me he had fallen in love with me. Such a piece of crap person who killed a part of me that I'll never get back. Definitely don't catfish people. It's a crappy thing to do. Story 33. This happened back in the dial-up BBS days in the early 90s. Before Netflix and chill, we had VHS and couch. The woman wasn't especially pretty, but was smart and rich, daughter of a doctor, and really liked me, so I gave it a go. Our first date, she wants to meet at her place and watch a movie. Great, I figure I'm in like Flynn. So I arrive at her address and feel even luckier as it's a new neighborhood of McMansions, years before that expression was even coined. Walking inside, it's a semi-open floor plan showcasing a professionally maintained rainforest and a 25 by 25 floor-to-ceiling glass on 4 sides area in the middle of everything, open to the sky and now perfectly lit at night. I make a good impression on her doctor dad with some smart banter, then we settle in for the movie. Her girl game soon proved to be as awkward as her unkempt plain looks, as she started making over-the-top PDAs with her dad sitting nearby, nose buried in some scholarly tome. I was trying to keep the escalation slow and discreet below couch level, and she kept putting both arms around me and leaning in too heavily, causing us to shift and move in the good doctor's periphery, even though he's apparently fine with it all. At one point, she gets on all fours, butt up and pointing in the general direction of her dad, and starts making out with my ear. Mind you, we haven't actually even kissed up to this point, but now she's breathing and slobbering loudly into my ear while her tongue explores it in a pattern like a Norway rat trying to find the little platform in the dark experimental dunk tank. Finally, she let out a low moan, which was supposed to be sexy, but at that intimate distance of 0 millimeters to my ear canal was more like a whale call, fit to carry across the countless nautical miles. Then she plunged her tongue piston like into my ear canal, simulating upon one eardrum a sudden dive to fathoms of depths and barometric pressure whales are accustomed to, causing me to jump up and yelp. I locked eyes with her very Jewish father while a long awkward moment passed, while no explanation was asked or offered as to why the hitherto nice very blonde and white boy suddenly jumped up and shouted, "Oi!" while in the process of making out with his daughter, whose butt is still up and pointing in his general direction. The moment passes, we get settled back into the movie, and at some point he bids us a friendly good night and pads silently into the dark catacombs of his suburban castle. Next lull in the movie, I go in for a regular kiss, which she over-eagerly reciprocates. She plunges her tongue into my mouth as deep as she can, then swishes it back and forth rhythmically like a windshield wiper. I try to interact using my tongue, but hers just sweeps it aside like a bug and continues the determined swish, swash, swish, swash. I break for air, then we kiss again, hoping it was a fluke. Nope, she plunges the tongue straight in again and starts sweeping back and forth mechanically. Now we've gotten through the movie, and she invites me to spend the night. She leads me to bed, strips down to a shirt and underwear, then says, "Just a minute," and goes into the bathroom across the hall. I'm laying there, thinking, it's weird, but hey, easy stuff's coming right up. A minute turns to 10, then 20. During which my detective ears picked up the distinctive sounds of several sizes and hardnesses of pills rattling around different sized bottles as they were upturned to disgorge their various rewards, and bouts of ugly crying. Finally, she burst in, turned out the light, and climbed into bed with me, and immediately started to try and make out. I paused the action and asked, "Are you okay?" She said yes, but it was obvious she had been crying and might start again with every unsteady breath. She was obviously rapidly coming under the influence of whatever pills she popped, and the whole thing was now just a sea of red flags. So I pulled the ripcord and made apologies as I quickly dressed to go. She clung to me and pleaded, "I don't want to lose you," as I thought, we just effing met today. Walked out of that palace of grave dysfunction, got in my inappropriately old and inexpensive car, and drove out of the clutches of McMansionville forever. Story 34. I used to play Grawl online back in the early 2000s. Loving every minute of making friends. Well, one person I got close with, and we started talking off of Grawl online and switched to MSN Messenger. It was going great, smooth as egg. I was 15, she was 16. I beat my stuff to her constantly, my little horny self, and she was quite attractive as well. She tells me she's coming to Chicago for a school trip to the art museum. I got excited and convinced my parents to let me go there, which they obviously agreed to since they always supported me learning. They obviously didn't know I was going there to meet a girl. So the day comes, and here I am at Millennium Station drinking Starbucks. She messages me, and we meet up at the museum in the small cafe. I meet her, and, well, she was tall. Like 6 feet tall. I was only 5'5" at the time. 5'9" now, by the way. We made out. Her breath reeked of bad pot, like she's smoking Reggie bushweed. I'm not put off by any of that, but this, it made my little butt puke a little. Also, she showed me a bad hygiene, not washing her hands, not covering her mouth when she sneezed, etc. It was like, not what I expected at all. When I got back home that night, I logged off my MSN Messenger and deleted my Grawl account. I never logged back into either of them, and I used a fake name the entire time. Phew. Story 36. I met him playing online poker. When I was a freshman in high school, my friend and I would play Texas Hold'em online and go in the chat room and just say dumb crap and joke around, as if a 7 and a 2 were a good hand, that kind of thing. Well, this guy, we'll call him Harry, started joining in with us and getting up to the same antics. We got some dude really mad at us, so my friend and I decided to switch poker tables and go annoy someone else. We invited Harry to come along with us, and he did. From that point on, I was really good friends with him. We lived in a faraway state and was maybe a year or two older than me. We talked online all the time. He was most definitely one of my best friends, and I confided in him and trusted him completely. We had a similar sense of humor, and things just made sense between us. I'd tell my IRL friends about him, and we would often talk to them too. I had several other online-only friends that I would just chit-chat with, and it never seemed too weird to me, but I was definitely closest with Harry. There was never anything romantic between Harry and I. Things were always very platonic, but I had always found him attractive. I figured he found me attractive as well, but it really wasn't important. We finally met each other in person while I was in college after years of being friends online. He met me at a very public place where I worked. He had a friend that lived in the same city as me and was visiting. He told me I was taller than he was expecting, but things seemed normal. I went out with him and his friend that night to bar hop. Got pretty drunk. His friend was very entertaining and outspoken. Harry was more my speed. After having a fun night, his friend had picked up some loud girl, and the four of us went back to the friend's apartment. We hung out in the living room for a short time, but then the friend went to his bedroom and started loudly having relations with the girl he had picked up. Harry and I laughed about it. It could have been awkward, but it wasn't. We were both drunk. Something intimate could have sparked between us, but it didn't. I had a boyfriend and wasn't the type to cheat. We spent some time together and then caught a cab home. The horror part of this story is nothing that ever came of us. Timing was wrong. Distance was wrong. If this were a movie, we could have gotten together. I like to imagine sometimes that it was. He now lives in the same state as me, but still too far away for it to matter. He is married and lives a much more active life than I do. I have been in the same relationship for several years. The saddest part is we no longer talk. I think we hit a turning point when we met, plus he no longer could handle the emotional instability I went through in my late college years. Still wonder what could have been. For the two people who read through this, thanks for reading. Ma'am, I know you said you're not the type to cheat, but I would just advise you, if you're not really fully committed to this relationship that you've been in for several years and you're still dreaming about other people, maybe set the other guy free. Story 37. I made friends with a guy on Tiny Chat server. Let's call him Dave. Dave and I became good friends over the course of 6 months, so I offered to fly him out to my place and let him stay for a few days. Get to know my roommate and myself. I was an 18-year-old girl. He was a 24-year-old guy. I picked Dave up from the airport and he just seems off. I don't really know how to describe it. Just off? Something definitely weird about the dude. I just figure it's nerves and brush it aside. We get to my place and he immediately starts trying to get me drunk. I may have been a stupid 18-year-old kid, but I wasn't stupid enough to get wasted with some weird dude in my living room I barely know. I tell him I'm ready to go to bed. I go lay on one couch, let Dave have the other. Just as I'm starting to fall asleep, I hear Dave quietly walking up behind me. Dude literally sticks his hand down my pants and tries to touch me. I was terrified, so I pretended I was still asleep and pushed him away. Eventually, he quit trying, and I didn't sleep a wink that night. I took Dave back to the airport the very next day, and he tried to kiss me. I acted like I didn't notice and got the F away from him as fast as possible. Ended up having to change my number to get him to stop calling me. F you, Dave. Story 38. We were friends of a friend in high school, but hadn't seen each other in 15 years when she Facebook friended me. After about 3 years of back and forth messaging, sending memes, etc., she came to town and was really eager to meet up. So I agreed and to get coffee with her. Show up to the coffee place and she is half an hour late and looks nothing like her pictures online anymore. I almost didn't recognize her. She sits down and monopolizes the conversation for an hour. We visit a local attraction where she gets in free with me and spends money in the gift shop, then says she'd really like to grab some food. We ride over to a restaurant and she orders a huge amount of food and eats it all. The check comes and the waitress asks if it's together or separate, and she immediately says, "It's together," smiling. I assume this means she is paying for me since I drove her to the restaurant and got her into the attraction for free. The waitress brings the check and puts it on the table. She leaves it untouched for like 10 minutes. I finally am like, "Hey, do we need to split it?" Mind you, I hadn't gotten some fries, whereas she racked up like a $30 bill. She goes, "Oh, you have to get this one. I don't have any more money." I freak out because I don't have $30. I ended up texting my husband asking him to transfer some money into my account from his. I try to leave and she starts crying that her brother kicked her out and her parents paid for a hotel for the rest of her stay, but she has no money to get back because she spent it at a gift shop. Mind you, we're both in our 30s. I reluctantly give her a ride back about 10 miles out of my way and drop her off with a bye. She hits me with a barrage of Facebook messages about how I'm a horrible person for embarrassing her and should be ashamed of my behavior. I blocked and deleted her like a house on fire. Story 39. I met a girl on Facebook dating app. She lived hours out of the city. I was recently out of a relationship, but she was cute and body was a bangin'. She seemed nice enough, a tiny bit country, so I offered up a place to hang out if she wanted to visit the city. She took up the offer. Was going to be a long visit, a week, 10 days, I don't remember. I drove 4 hours out to pick her up though, where I got roped into going to her ex's house, above a barn or something, to be her backup as she collected her glasses. Got home, She was a freak. It was fun, but I barely kept up. I mean, adult content, grade stuff. Almost lost my watch. There was blood. She wanted to keep going. Took her out to a club. She got crap showed and ended up losing her shirt after dancing in only her bra and flashing herself all over the dance floor. We did some Molly, went home. Cabby looked at us funny, for sure. More raunch. Day 3, it's recovery. Went to a pub just to get some food and drinks with a buddy of mine. Ran into some old school friends too. She got blasted in no time. Went from fun to her yelling about how much she loved some freaky stuff, our previous nights, etc. to these people that were strangers to her. Then she's hitting on a dude at the bar and accepting free drinks? What the F? Got home, she's crying. She's sorry. My friend reamed her out. I went to work, got home, and she had cleaned my whole apartment. Ended up driving her home real early. Awkward 4-hour drive, and barely ever spoke after. She was the 4th girl in a row with the same name I've dated or seen. It should have been a sign. I stopped dating girls with that name after I met number 5. Positive, though, at the club Gothy, my longer-time friend and possible interest saw me with the new girl and decided it was time to put the moves on me that night. Country girl didn't notice, ended up dating and making a best friend for life after. Story 40. I had this online friend back when I was a teen. We hit it off really well and would talk all the time. Eventually, we decided to meet up IRL since we lived pretty close to each other. I had already had some instances where it turned out I was chatting with guys who were 30 plus. I was very naive. So when my mom found out, she insisted on driving me to our meeting spot and taking us home to hang out. It was a little awkward to sit in the living room with my mom in the room next door, but we made it work and we had fun. It was after that things went wrong. He started to become a little obsessive and stalking me. He'd send me messages telling me what I was wearing at that moment and where I was, saying he'd unalive himself if I ever stopped talking to him. Things like that. It was terrifying, and I stupidly didn't tell my mom. I kept talking to him because I was scared he'd do something, either to himself or me. After some time, I got a message from him saying he was joining the army, and then I never heard from him again. Story 41. Do I ever? Buckle up, y'all. It's a long one. When I was 11, there was a game website that had chat rooms. You could play games with other people and chat alongside the game, etc. There weren't a lot of younger kids on the site, and I never usually talked to anyone. Until I saw one day this kid, we'll call him A, said he was 12. So I started talking to him because I had never seen another kid play on the website at that point. We ended up becoming friends and began talking on AOL, IM. My mom was super skeptical of the whole thing, so we asked him to write my name on a piece of paper and then take a picture with it. My mom seemed satisfied after that and never questioned it again. Our friendship was only ever platonic. We stayed friends for about 3 years and kept connected through the game website and MySpace. When Facebook came around, I stopped using MySpace and lost track of him after that. Cut to a few years later, and I'm now in college. I was in a 3-hour-long class and decided to bring my laptop with me, which I never did. During our 15-minute break, I decided to check my Twitter account, which was inactive and I hadn't used in years. I saw that there was a message from A from like 2 weeks before and instantly messaged him back, not believing it was really him, but it was, and we reconnected. He was dating this girl from his hometown but wasn't happy. I was single and away at school, 10 hours from home while my mother was dying from an unknown illness at the time. A was there for me at any hour of the day or night and comforted me when things were bleak and not looking good for my mom. We made plans for New Year's. I live in New York and he lived in Kentucky. To go see the ball drop in the big city and finally meet for the first time. But I was broke and December was really rough for my mom, so I canceled. I quit school to take care of my mom because I was so busy with her. We didn't talk as much. I started dating this guy and stopped talking to A altogether. It didn't last long and A messaged me after I had changed my relationship status back to single on Facebook. He told me he also had broken up with his girlfriend and from that point on we were talking. We would be on the phone for hours, texting all day and night. We would download movies on our laptops and press play at the same time so we could watch it together. He would call up Starbucks at the mall I worked in and buy me a drink over the phone, then tell me to go pick it up. He connected with my mom on Facebook to wish her well in her illness. He was, in my opinion, perfect, and I was falling hard. This went on for months. The week before my 20th birthday, my best friend told me we were going out to dinner with her boyfriend and a few of his friends that she wanted to try and hook me up with. She knew about A, but didn't know it was serious. I wasn't really interested, but she kept bugging me, so I relented. We go to dinner, and A walks in with my best friend's boyfriend instead of his friends. My heart dropped into my stomach and started doing the cha-cha slide. He had contacted my best friend weeks before and wanted to surprise me for my birthday. He stayed for a whole week. We went to the local aquarium, the beach. He had never seen the ocean before. Got Slurpees. They don't have 7-Elevens where he's from. And went to Dave & Buster's. Went paintballing. It was amazing. We kissed the night before he left, and I was heartbroken he was leaving. He told me he would be back. The next day, he messaged my dad, whom I live with, and told him that he wanted to be with me and wanted to know if my dad could help him move to New York so that he could do that. My dad, impressed at the speech and how I was treated this week that A was there, told him he could live with us rent-free if he helped my dad with his business. I live on a poultry farm. It was labor-intensive, but A was extremely adamant about moving to New York to be with me. So he did. A month later, he drove his little car from Kentucky to New York with his dog and all his belongings. The first night he was there, he had to run out to his car to get something. Our phones, both iPhones, were next to each other and one of them beeped. Thinking it was mine, I picked it up and saw there was a text from E. E was his ex-girlfriend. The text said, "I miss my whale nugget." I was super confused and slightly disgusted. Whale nugget? But he had just driven 9 hours, hundreds of miles with all his belongings and his dog. I didn't sweat it and never mentioned it to him. The first 2 weeks were heaven. I lost myself to him, fell in love, finished the summer with a new job and new confidence. He was working with my dad and that was going well. My mom was on the mend finally and things were just going really good. Then he started getting phone calls from his mother saying how much she missed him, how could he leave her, why would he do this to her, etc. She would make passive-aggressive Facebook statuses, would message me and ask for him. It was overwhelming, especially only a few weeks into the relationship, and it was every single day. "How could you leave me? My baby!" Gag. Something changed about a month in. We had been having relations every single night, and then it went to a few nights, and then it stopped completely. We had been squeezing onto my twin mattress, but suddenly he wanted the couch instead. He would blow off my dad to go fishing every single day, all day long, didn't want to hang out with my friends anymore, and was always on his phone. This went on for another 2 weeks before he finally broke the news to me that his mother was falling into a deep depression and that he was going to have to move back home. I was devastated. He moved back home and the next day on Facebook he was back in a relationship with E, which was funny because him and I had never broken up. We had kissed goodbye and had relations the night before, but I received a message from E on Facebook that they had never broken up, that it was just a break and that he needed to find himself. But he did, and that's why he moved back home. I was furious that I had been used for the last 2 months. I was furious that he was an amazing liar. She sent me screenshots of conversations they had during the 2 months he lived with me, making fun of my weight during intimate times, how bored he was there, and how he couldn't wait to go home. Every single thing he had told me was an effing lie. I don't remember how it started, but he started posting pictures that he took of me unknowingly on Twitter, and these were really, really unflattering pictures. One in particular that has stuck with me was a picture of me and his dog on my couch that he tweeted to National Geographic and said, "Look at Nat Geo, a whale is eating my dog." Another one read, "We all have that one fat female dog we've slept with. Guilty as charged." For 10 months, this was every single day. Back then, you could block someone on Twitter, but all blocking did was prevent the person from adding you. I could still see all the tweets, and morbid curiosity got me every single time. Didn't matter how many times I reported him to Twitter, they never took the tweets or his account down. Pictures I hadn't known he had taken. He had gone through my diary and posted entries on his Facebook that he and his friends and family commented and laughed at me on. Eventually, I stopped caring. I stopped looking at his social media accounts. I met someone else and eventually moved on. Hindsight really is 2020. I wish I could go back and slap myself for ignoring the whale nugget bullcrap. I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. Story 42. I actually have 3 stories for you because I'm an idiot who doesn't learn his lesson. A little background first. I grew up in a cult, had an abusive uncle, and lived with my single mom who had bipolar schizoaffective disorder. I was awkward as heck, had no social skills or self-confidence, and home life sucked. So let's get to the 3. 1. I had been playing an online text-based game with a guy that lived 2 hours away. I thought he was the coolest guy, really nice. One night my mom bashed my head in with a lamp. She was the sweetest woman when she was well, but violence was common when off her meds. Bleeding and desperate, I messaged him about what had happened. He told me, "Hey, I talked to my parents and we are coming to get you right now." Never met him before, but they came and picked me up and I moved in with them. I had a trash bag full of some clothes and nothing else, and I had just turned 16 a month before. The very first night I was there, the mom got drunk. started ramming her Mercedes into the dad's BMW on purpose, and the son pulled a gun on Mom to get her to stop. Mom runs off into the night and moved in with her boyfriend. She'd been cheating, and Dad didn't know until that night. So, all three of us are in a bad place. We played Monopoly and ate junk food until like 3 a.m. I got a job at Walmart, started community college. I got my GED at 16 and things seemed okay. The family very generously was letting me live at their place for free. The dad was pretty well off, so he didn't bat an eye at taking me to dinner with his son and paying for it, etc. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life. We always lived hand to mouth. About 3 months in, the dad gets arrested. Apparently, he was a very prominent member of the Republic of Texas movement that wanted to secede from the Union, and as a sovereign citizen, hadn't paid his taxes in years. House and cars get seized for back taxes, son goes with his grandma, but I find myself with no place to live. I ended up moving back home. 2 months after moving back home, my mom tried to stab me in the chest with a knife. I caught her wrist in time so it barely broke skin. I decided it was time to leave again. I had been talking to a girl online for about 6 months. She lived near Chicago. I lived in Texas. We are both 16, so naturally I think I'll take a bus to Chicago and get a job there, because that's what rational teens do, right? I saved up for about a month from my crappy data entry job, didn't tell my mom I was leaving, and went straight to Chicago, a small suburb actually. I knock on the door of the address she gave me. She asked me to come, of course. Nobody answers. I call a mutual friend that went to school with her from a payphone. Remember those? And the friend confesses that the girl had catfished me the whole time. She was using the friend's pictures. The girl I went to see was around 300 pounds, not the hot teen she was pretending to be. And both girls thought it was really funny until I actually showed up. The girl I went to meet eventually did come out and apologized to me profusely. She had been catfishing almost a dozen guys because she was addicted to the attention. Hot friend apologized too. I hopped on a bus and went back to Texas feeling defeated. 3. Home life still sucked. I started talking to another girl online because I was too awkward for real relationships. She lived in Canada. 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, I flew up there thinking I'll get a job in Canada. Everything will be fine. This was before 9/11 and you didn't need a visa. At airport security in Canada, I went through customs. Apparently, I knew nothing about immigration or the law. On the plus side, the girl got to visit me in the airport security holding area before the Canadian officials put me on a plane, courtesy of the government since I bought a one-way ticket, back to Texas. I was handcuffed on the plane and had a security guard sitting with me all the way back to Texas and told me not to come back. It was an interesting experience. Shortly after moving back in, for the 3rd time, I had my head bashed in again and a friend from school and his family took me in. I moved to a big city when they moved, got a decent job, and now 16 years and lots of therapy later, I can laugh about it all. Story 43. He was a semi-famous computer programmer, well-known, respected, and glorified. He lived a frugal life and traveled around countries giving talks about free software and stuff. I heard he was coming to my country to give some talks, and they wanted people to host him. So I applied and got accepted as a host. The first red flag was the email with a list of requirements, from temperature, humidity, pets, food, drinks, right down to brand names, etc., etc., etc. You name it, it was in there. Despite that all, I moved the kids into shared rooms so he could have his own room, set the AC on, and we were set. Dude turned up with a girlfriend at the time, talked super loud really late at night, got up super early in the morning and loudly stomped about, showered, etc., farted, burped, ate his own snot or body bits he picked off. He was constantly rude and obnoxious and knew everything and would argue everything with no leeway or common ground. Boy, was I glad when he left. On the plus side, after he left, the kids never once questioned when I said, "Do this, it's good manners." They also requested that guy, please, never come back. Story 44. Not a horror story, but still. I was on a trip to Ireland, and my friend got sick and went back to Canada. I decided that I would spend the rest of my trip with an online friend who lived in Germany. We got along awesome through email and chat. She edited my stories for me, and we talked about traveling. We knew each other for probably 2 years. Anyway, I fly over to Germany and stay at her place. She was really busy, and we didn't really hang out, but that was okay. I hung out with her mom and did some exploring by myself, including a day trip to Cologne and went for a weekend trip to Paris. On the morning I was leaving, we were having breakfast, and it's when I realized, after about a week, that things weren't okay. The plan was for me to catch a train to Frankfurt and then get on my plane. She wasn't able to drive me, but I told her no worries, I could handle getting there. She looks at me and says, "It seems like you're expecting me to drive you to the airport?" And I'm like, No, I'm good with taking trains. To be honest, I love trains. and she was really standoffish. When I leave, she waves goodbye, says it was nice meeting me, etc. Fly back to Canada, everything is great. Then one day my mom calls me into the living room. I was 19 at the time. Apparently my friend sent my mom a message on Facebook saying that I was basically a horrible guest and was rude and that she didn't think I was ready to actually travel, and maybe I should grow up some more. My mom couldn't believe it, and I actually started to cry. I had made sure to be the best darn Canadian I could ever be. I constantly was polite, said please and thank you. It was my first time solo traveling, so I was a bit weary, but I didn't think it was bad. That effed me up so good, I was so uncomfortable that I still, 4 years later, don't want to go to my friends' houses for more than a day because I'm terrified they'll think I'm a bad guest. It took me 3 years before I would even travel again, something I absolutely love. Story 45. This doesn't really answer the question because I didn't meet him and we never planned to meet, but I think it's close enough. If not, I can delete this comment or something. I used to use this one app that lets you connect to random people and talk to them. Kinda worked like Tinder, but not for dating. I was talking to a lot of people, and a lot of them were super creepy. One was claiming to be a doctor, and then he needed to see my breasts so he could tell me if I had cancer. When that failed, he told me that he could make them bigger, and a lot of people wanted some inappropriate content. But there was one that was just super creepy to me. We were trying to start a conversation, but it ended up just being a bunch of questions and short answers. How are you? Do you have any hobbies? Okay, cool. Then he asked me what country I lived in. I told him. I asked what city he lived in. He asked what city I live in. And as the idiot I was, I told him. Then he started asking about what area of the town I live in, and I once again told him because I was an idiot. I did start to get suspicious, though. Then he asked for the street and the house number, to which I just told him I can't tell him that. But he kept insisting that he wouldn't do anything with that information and even shared his address. Still super creepy though. Once again, sorry if it doesn't answer your question exactly, and sorry if it's not that much of an exciting story. Story 46. Long story. So my guy friend had become super BFFs with this girl he met on Omegle. No one thought anything of it because he's the most charismatic guy you'll ever meet. So of course he had online besties. Well, they're basically pen pals for 2+ years. We all live on the West Coast and she lives on the East Coast. Until one day she prompts that he comes to her place for 2 weeks, and since my friend is always up for an adventure and being a socialite, he said sure. Keep in mind he was 15 and she was 16. Well, even his parents saw no issue and both of the parents got everything situated and bought the tickets. So now it's about 2 days before he has to fly out and he comes up to me freaking out, because she just texted him about how much she loves him and how much she can't wait to be alone with him. Besides me telling him, I told you so, I'm helping him figure out how to tell his girlfriend. The deal was that he'd be staying with family there. Well, my friend is also horrible when dealing with confrontation, so his plan is, if I just stand my ground and friend zone her by ignoring every romantic or sexual attempt, she'll get the hint, and then I'll be fine. So a couple days pass and he's there. The moment he met her, she acted like they were some long-term distance couple in front of her parents. In public, she jumped on him and was shouting about how much she missed him. He plays it cool, but now strangers think he's a mean boyfriend. During the almost 3-hour car ride and tour, every time he tried to bring his girlfriend up or any of his interests, this chick would change the subject. This could also apply to r/entitled kids. Her parents, for both ease and hospitality, had something planned for nearly every day of those 2 weeks. Yay, right? Haha, wrong. This chick was only ever somewhat nice when things were going her way. Her parents' lack of parenting, her rage, and my friend's lack of courage resulted in him dealing with her flippant mood swings for 2 weeks. The worst/scariest things she did were 1. Turn off and hide his phone while they were swimming, mainly in an attempt to get him to wrestle her, also hiding his inhalers for the same purpose. 2. Block his parents, a couple of his friends, and his girlfriend because they're taking away from our alone time. They were watching a movie. 3. Convinced him to play hide-and-seek with a truth or dare twist on a dull day. Yet when she found out he was hiding in the basement, she came in and locked the door, turned off the lights, and started taking her clothes off because it was stuffy down there. He of course came out when he heard the door lock and freaked out. She used the "I'm on my period" excuse. 4. While at an amusement park, she was scared on the ride, so she kept trying to hold his hand or hug him, conveniently right before the little scream cam would take their pick. 5. While at the water park with both families, she kept forgetting how to double knot her bikini and would only ask him to tie it, to which she would ask if it's sitting right by bouncing and looking at him. 6. When they went to the mall, she had taken his phone to just take a funny pic, to which she very quickly sent a horrible message to his girlfriend and then removed her number from his phone. This caused him and his girlfriend to argue, and when the arguing was done, she came up to him all consoling like, These were all things that happened on the first encounter. This broad had convinced almost everyone that she should visit the West Coast during Christmas. A lot of these same things happened, but at that point my friend lost his cool, so for a week she spent her time trying to seduce almost all of his guy friends, whether or not they had girlfriends or boyfriends. During all the time she had his phone, she had been grabbing his buddies' numbers. At this point, she's almost 18 and he's 17. She was trying to hook up with about 6 of his friends, including a 14-year-old. This is also the first time his girlfriend and her get to meet, which the chick tried to avoid. Girlfriend stands at 5'7" and about 160 pounds, does MMA for fun, and has a pretty big cop family. Chick is about 5'1" and 100 pounds. Well, the chick, thinking she can outsmart this, tries to befriend the girlfriend to mainly turn the anger towards her boyfriend, also thinking that his girlfriend wouldn't act out since this was a family event. It almost worked until a smart remark about some of the creepy stuff this chick has done was made by his girlfriend, when the chick tried to punch her but missed. Yeah, his girlfriend quickly won that fight. This happened on Christmas Eve too. In the end, my friend has never made a BFF online ever since then. His girlfriend and him are better than ever, whereas the East Coast chick has flown home early and occasionally tries to come back like some virus. She's an ongoing joke to us now. Story 47. Met a guy on an online game. We were in the same guild. I thought we were just friends and doing quests and stuff. He kept pestering me about getting Skype and doing voice chat. I finally agreed to voice chat but never do video chat. Then he wanted my Facebook. That wasn't going to happen, so I lied and said I didn't have one. I didn't want some guy I've only sort of known for a few months to know my full name, family, hometown, etc. Once he finally dropped the Facebook thing, then he kept badgering me about sending him pics. He'd send me pictures of himself, luckily nothing lewd, but demanded pictures of me to reciprocate. One day, I just blocked him and deleted my voice chat account. He made me stop playing online games for a while. A couple months later, I decided I wanted to get back into the online game. My account was filled with messages from him telling me how I had led him on and I was his true love. Immediately blocked him on there as well. Then the guild leader got all, "Why are you being so mean to him? He told us you blocked him for no reason and you won't talk to him." I just left the guild. Haven't got back on in months. I miss the game, but I don't miss the weirdos. Story 48. Obligatory, not me, but this is literally just happening to my dad. So my dad is really into road bicycling, and this is some triathlete groups on Facebook where he apparently made friends and some pro cyclist from Portugal. This dude from Portugal posts in the Facebook group saying he's moving to my parents' city in the US to train for his triathlons and asks if he can stay with anyone for a couple months while he finds a place and gets on his feet. My dad gets all excited about this and asks my mom if the guy can move in for a few months, and my mom, for some reason, agrees. I think just because all of us kids are out of the house now and they do have a lot of extra space. Fast forward to 2 months after the guy arrives, my mom has been getting super weird vibes from him and is getting anxious for him to move out and find his own place. But my dad is apparently having a great time with this guy as their roommate and is in no hurry for the guy to leave. My mom gets frustrated and decides she thinks there's something weird with this guy and Googles him. The Google search reveals he was convicted of felony credit card fraud in Portugal 2 years ago after hacking his friend's computer and stealing over 10,000 euros from his bank account. Not only that, but she keeps searching and finds like 3 more convictions of various different fraud schemes he had been convicted for. The schemes were always to steal from friends of his too, which seemed like the most effed up part to me. My mom ended up confronting him with it and asking him to move out ASAP. So the guy is supposed to leave tomorrow, but I told my parents to hide their valuables, put their credit cards on lockdown, and change their banking passwords. Super sketchy. Story 49. Prodigy bullet board systems in the mid-90s. Local chat rooms, in my case specifically, the Texas room, were pretty fun places to meet people. I was about 19, male, and had been talking to this woman for a while. She drives up to DFW from Houston to meet me for dinner. When she arrives, I discover she had pretty much invented the MySpace angle long before MySpace existed. No biggie, it's just dinner, right? She starts talking and doesn't stop. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I don't even remember how she ate anything. No pauses. No looking for me to contribute, just a complete stream of consciousness non-stop talking. I don't even know how she was breathing. It was insane. The servers were throwing me pity looks. I don't think I got a single word in after the initial meet in the parking lot. She is encouraging me to move to Houston where she will get me an apartment and pay all my bills. I'll basically exist just to be intimate with her. Now in my 40s, that might not sound so bad, but the level of crazy in this woman was literally like gravity. Long story short, she ended up basically trying to SA me by the end of the night, but I escaped with my virtue. Aside from the sugar mama bullcrap, I can't even remember a single thing she talked about. She might as well have been talking in a foreign language that never got around to inventing the period. Story 50. Late to the party, but I met an online friend of 2-ish years in prison while helping a friend from school move. We had met on an old school roleplay chat and eventually moved to Skyping, since we both liked crafting. We both lived alone at the time, so we'd put on movies and sit and crochet or whatever, and that was a big chunk of our relationship. She was 24 and I was 22. She seemed lonelier than me and spent a lot of time bemoaning how she had no friends or money. She had bought a house by herself at 21 and was part of multiple MLMs. I liked her enough that I just politely turned down all her offers to buy weight loss shakes and makeup. She was always angling for me to come visit, so when the opportunity came up, I let her know that I was helping a friend move a few hours away, so we'd be passing through. She graciously offered for us to crash at her place on the way. Turned out she lived in the middle of this very 50s suburban neighborhood in a one-bedroom house with no doors on any of the rooms. She'd spent all her money trying to live this Facebook mom group life despite being a single 20-something, so the house itself was basically empty with pillows on the floor in lieu of furniture. She had no bathroom door or table, but she had an expensive coffee maker and a metric ton of weight loss shakes. She was sleeping on the floor in a sleeping bag. She never had anyone over because she barely had friends in real life, so her house was staged to keep up appearances with her mom friends online, and not really meant to be lived in. We decided to be polite and make do, but the bathroom was facing the living/bed area such that you had to look dead into the house if you sat on the toilet. Whichever one of us needed to pee and eventually shower, the others just walked outside. Naturally, I got a massive stomach cramp at like 3 a.m. and had to crawl up and take the stealthiest, most painful poop of my life while looking over the bodies of my sleeping friends. Story 51. I'm not sure if this is the kind of horror story, but it still bothers me many years later. Way back in the day, I met a guy through online role-playing in AOL chat rooms. It was never anything questionable, we just had characters and would play out scenarios together. Eventually, we really got to know each other, and friendship became a long-distance relationship. We would talk on the phone for hours and send each other packages. Our parents spoke at one point, and after chatting for a couple of years, they helped us set up for us to meet. Everything went well. His dad brought him to my hometown, and we actually got to meet. We saw each other a handful of times after that, too. He was my first relationship and just generally a good friend during a lot of my middle school, high school, formative years. Eventually, we broke up but continued to be friends and keep in touch. I always thought I would see him again someday. When I was in my 20s, he had a death in the family and I remember talking to him. 2 or 3 months later, I woke up from dreaming about him at like 4:30 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I went online to send him a message that I figured he'd get whenever he was next on. So the horror story part, for me, was that I found out that he had been found dead in his apartment a few days before I went to send him that message. He had had a brain aneurysm. It was absolutely crushing to know I hadn't made it a priority to see him again and that I would never talk to him again. It still really saddens me when I think about it now, several years later. Story 52. So this story starts with a man from Florida. We matched on Tinder while I was on vacation in Florida. We met up while I was in Florida and hooked up a few times. It was great, he was great, and genuinely just a beautiful man who ruined my whole life with his chicken. When I came back to my state, he reached out. Of course, I responded. We had a great time. I was thinking I would never see this guy again, but talking to him, mostly sexting, was fun. We continued to talk, and he asked if he could come visit. I, of course, said yes. Why wouldn't I? This drop-dead gorgeous god was going to visit me? I was thinking like months from now, not immediately. Well, he asks when I'm off, and I give him some dates. He tells me that he is coming to my city. I assume he is flying. I'm 1,500 miles away from Florida. He tells me he is driving. He drives 3 days to see me. He arrives Thursday night. We spend the night together. He rocks my world. Like, really, have I never felt anything quite like this from a man? We spend Friday together. Midday, immediately after having more mind-blowing relations, I tell him I'm going home to change and get ready for a concert we were to attend. My house is like 45 minutes away. I get home, text him a thank you for the great relations. He calls me and tells me that 3 days is a big commitment and he should have flown and that he needs to go back to Florida. He leaves that night and goes back to Florida. Super weird situation. Now all I can think about is what is wrong with me that this person couldn't even stand to spend the weekend with me. Like, this has really messed me up. I asked asked him if I could have done things differently, and he said that he could not think of anything I could have done that him leaving had to do with how he was feeling. I can rationally accept that, but on another level, I just keep thinking that I am the problem. Like maybe he had this expectation of who I am and I didn't meet that, or that I am just boring. I just wanted to have some intimacy with the guy. I didn't expect anything from him. Honestly, we spent more time together than I thought we would. The whole situation was weird. We didn't know each other outside of the biblical sense. Like, I should have said no to the visit and given it more time. Like, 3 days with a stranger may sound super hot, but dang, it blew up in my face and not in a good way. The whole situation effed with me pretty hard. Story 53. My neighbor had actually done this and it wound up coming to my house. This was 2006 or so. We, all the kids in the neighborhood, were all around the same age, 14 to 17, and my neighbor had told the social circle that he had made an Xbox buddy that didn't live far supposedly from our location and was going to invite him over so we could all meet this cool guy. But I didn't think he was serious because he says lots of things that never come true or happen or have ever happened. He exaggerates his stories. I forget about what he said, I think we all did, and it's like a month later, in late November. It's 20 degrees out and we get a knock at our door at 11 p.m. at night. It's some goth as F kid asking if we knew so-and-so, our neighbor. He was like 15 and turns out our neighbor had completely ghosted him and went to the beach the weekend they were supposed to meet. His parents had to drive 2 hours to get here and had already left. He couldn't get self-service to call them, so he spent the night with us. My mom felt bad for him because he seemed really shy and was probably embarrassed AF. He turned out to be totally cool. Really sweet, loved animals and video games. His parents couldn't or wouldn't come get him, so my stepdad met them halfway. Well, he doesn't let that deter him and tried to meet up with my neighbor sometime later. The same thing happens. He comes knocking at my door late at night, but he's crying. They had stolen his wallet and broke his cell phone, and he was either high or drunk because he was slurring his speech and unable to stand correctly. My mom calls the police the next day because she didn't even know he was there. I was naive and wasn't sure if he would get in trouble for being high or drunk and made a bed for him in the living room. I didn't believe him at first about the wallet and phone, but my sister said to let him in. Cops got called the next day. Was lots of stupid drama for that kid and neighbors. It wound up going to court. Last I heard, the kid went into the Marines after high school, is married, and is doing good. Wow. So in the end, your actual next door neighbor was the problem. You should have traded him. Story 54. Oh boy, I got a good one. So in early 2017, I met a girl on Facebook in a group we were both in. We were good friends at first, then became best friends. She lived in the States and I in Canada. Her home situation was not great. She was adopted and her adopted parents abused her in every way imaginable. In June 2017, we started dating online. She was my first ever girlfriend, my first ever relationship, and I fell in love with her. At the end of September, she escaped and lived in a women's shelter. We both worked on getting her up here so we could be together in person. We talked every day for hours on end, text, call, FaceTime, you name it. And in mid-December 2017, she arrived here up in Canada. And I was happier than I've ever been before in my life. But she couldn't stay in Canada for long without citizenship. So we had a plan. We would get married, and that would give her citizenship so she could stay here and we could be together for what I was hoping would be forever. On April 1st, 2018, we got married. I was 19, she was 20. Between then and August 2018, we managed to find a job together and we located her biological dad. At mid-August, we decided to quit our job and move down to Alabama, where her dad and his wife lived. We drove down to the border and I hit a snag. I got barred entry at the border and was not allowed to enter the States. So we tried going back into Canada and she got barred from entering there. So we were forcibly split up, and I had planned on working on getting my way down there as quickly and legally as I could. About a week goes by and she tells me she's ready for a divorce. For the next 2 weeks, I try to convince her not to give up on us and to try again. And at the end of the 2 weeks, she drops a bombshell on me. She cheated on me. But not with just any random guy, no. She cheated on me with her stepbrother. That broke me. I wanted to die. I didn't want to exist any longer. Since then, up until this past Tuesday, I have learned a lot about her since then. Those being she cheated on me with 2 other guys before she came up here and was in the shelter. She lied about her drinking and smoking weed. I have nothing wrong with weed, but she made a promise and promises meant the world to her. She blames me for her cat's death, who was in my custody, even though we never found out what she died of and it was very sudden. Apparently, all of my stuff that she has got stolen by some drug people, and somehow I gave her herpes, even though she is the only person I've ever been with in any way possible, and I got tested last year, and I'm as clean as an effing whistle. She's a sociopathic liar and probably stole my stuff and is probably also on drugs, not to mention drinking and whatnot. I am now 20, and I'm going to be a divorcee soon. So, to sum it all up, I met the supposed love of my life, and she turned out to be a multiple cheater, a chronic liar, close to being an alcoholic, and a heartless heartbreaker who lost my stuff. Me and my family believe she sold my stuff for crack, booze, whatever, and lied about it, which I wouldn't put past her. Accused me of killing her cat, who she says she cared about but has no way of supporting her as well as a normal person could, and accused me, a monogamous, clean, herpes-free virgin male, of giving her a chronic cheater herpes somehow. I also can't work due to having a seizure from all the stress. Almost got sent to the psych ward, put on antipsychotics, and was wanting to self-unalive for weeks on end because of all of this. Not to mention, I lost a lot of my stuff that is very valuable and precious to me and holds a ton of sentimental value. Costed a lot, and a lot of money, and most of which were gifts from the people I love and care about the most in my life. So yeah, horror doesn't even begin to crack the surface of the finally meeting my friend internet story. Oh, that's tragic. Now, where were his parents in all this? Did nobody object to this idea or, throw out any bit of advice? That sucks. Story 55. I'm not sure if I've ever actually shared this story with anyone. It's more heartbreaking than anything. This was about 7 years ago. I was hanging out with this guy I worked with, who I was interested in, and a few of his friends. He was living at his friend's parents' house, so right off the bat it was a little uncomfortable. At some point he took his buddies and went across the street to do some drugs with the neighbors and told me to wait since he knew I wasn't down for it. He was gone for like an hour, and I didn't have a car, so I was sitting there, crying on the porch. The friends he lived with were two brothers. We'll call them Tom and Nick. Tom came out to have a cigarette and told me he'd take me home. He talked to me all the way there about what a loser Guy was and selfish, and even though they were friends, he didn't like what he was doing with himself, and he apologized a million times for getting wrapped up in it. He told me to stay away from Guy in general, and I felt he was telling me because he genuinely cared about my feelings. He dropped me off, and on the way home, he got a DUI. I mostly cut off contact with everyone involved. Obviously, I felt extremely guilty since he had only been out to drive me home, and I hadn't even realized how drunk he was. Plus, after his really sincere warning about Guy, I was done with him anyways. Fast forward a year later, and Tom died. He crashed his car into a tree down the street from my mom's house and died instantly. I maintained a respectful distance. Another year later, I was living with my boyfriend, and I got this random message on Instagram. It was Nick, asking if I was that girl he had taken home the night he got his DUI, and he told me about how much had happened since Tom died. I wanted to connect with him because I felt like it was somehow my fault, so I agreed to pick him up and we could go on a drive and talk. Nick was friends with some of my friends from high school, so I didn't really think twice about it. I felt terrible for what he was going through and wanted to be a good friend. I picked him up in the evening and we went for a drive, and I took him to one of my favorite spots, a local reservoir that was tucked away in the hills. We went and sat on the edge and just talked about Tom and Guy that I had been talking to. Then crap got weird. He told me that the night Tom had gotten the DUI, he changed. I tried to be sympathetic because I still felt like it was my fault, but Nick told me, I don't know why Tom would risk his record or freedom to take you home, but he saw something in you. Now I see what he saw. And I was like, thank you? But really, that's just who Tom was, just a nice guy who really helped me out. He went on to say that since his brother had passed, he believed that he could still find, I don't even know how to explain, parts of his soul in other people and things. Basically, he confessed that he was convinced that because of that night, I had a part of his brother. And then he tried to kiss me. I was like, whoa, dude, I have a boyfriend. I'm just trying to connect and hear you out. He kept saying weird crap about me having a part of his brother and I changed him and that whole night changed him because of me, and kept trying to kiss me over and over. He was a really good-looking guy and I felt for his pain of losing a loved one, but I had to throw up some boundaries. After several attempts to kiss me and lay down on the concrete at the top of the reservoir, I was feeling really uncomfortable and called it a night. He was pretty upset, but at that point I wasn't as sympathetic. I told him, look, I want to help you through this, but I can't let you kiss me and put me in this position. All the way back to his place, he basically threw a fit and insisted over and over again that somehow I had a piece of his brother, and the way fate had put me there that night and changed Tom was all this huge, I don't know, cosmic thing. He said it had taken 2 years to track me down. That alone was kind of scary in retrospect. Needless to say, I dropped him off and let him scream at my car while I drove away, at this point, full on shaken. I went home and told my boyfriend about it and told him what had happened. He was very concerned and we both agreed it was probably best to block Nick for a bit while he goes through whatever he's going through. But the words themselves still kind of ring in my head now and then. You have a part of my brother and I want him back. Edit. Wow, after thinking about this for a minute, I remember how Nick found me. He had Tom's old phone, and I had given Tom my number to text me when he got home safe. He had literally spent 2 years digging through his dead brother's phone to find the girl he drove home that night he got the DUI. In retrospect, that makes it even sadder and creepier. Story 56. I'd gotten to know this guy off an online game I played for a short period of time. He seemed nice enough at first, but would always ask me personal information, like my real name, age, where I lived. I never gave him the info, but used fake ones. About a half year goes by and he slips up, calling me by my real name, which I had never given him. He tried to play it off that I told him it a while ago, but I knew that wasn't true and started ghosting him after all that while. About a half year later, he contacts me again, demanding to know where I've been. I told him I'd been busy, to which he replied, "Didn't know a play took up so much time." This was when Facebook was just starting up and I didn't have one. I didn't post about my personal life, online or beyond, a privately set up live journal, which wasn't under my name, and even those were random. This freak on a leash was stalking me for whatever reason. I promptly told him I didn't want to hear from him again and kept an eye open for a good while for anyone acting shifty as well as to tell my parents about it. I never really found out who he was, but my dad did catch some shady looking guy creeping around our house and scared him off. He's a fairly big guy, and when he's mad, he can intimidate people easily. But my dad's really a big old softy. Either way, it's been probably some 13 years ago since then, and thankfully I've not heard from the guy since. Story 57. I have posted this somewhere before. Finally, something I have an interesting story about. I met someone on the internet about 10 years ago. We got on really well, and he didn't live that far away from me, so I decided to meet. He was my age, and we were into the same things. We met and got on well, so we started dating. That's where it started to go wrong. We dated for a few months, but things started getting weird a few months in. He started to talk about how he could now tell me that he was a warlock and how he would do rituals to help our relationship and cement our love. He also wanted to do a ceremony-type ritual to strengthen us. This started weirding me out. He also tried to get quite controlling, telling me what music I could and couldn't listen to, and if I liked something he didn't like, I was wrong. Unluckily for him, he tried that on the wrong person, and he was sharply shut down. He was also about 90 pounds soaking wet and didn't scare me in the lightest. I met some of his friends and we got on well. He didn't like this either and started calling me horrible things. So I broke up with him. I didn't see him for a few months, but this was back in the days of MSN Messenger. He would message me horrible things and how he hoped my life was awful without him, and how he hoped bad things would happen to me, etc. He said he was using his powers to send me bad luck and hoped I would hurt myself. He would also text me similar things and then pretend it wasn't him. Few months later, it was the friend I'd met's birthday, so I went for drinks with her. He turned up out of the blue. He kept texting our mutual friend how much he hated me and how he wanted to incapacitate me using his magic, cut my head off and use it as a ritual or whatever, which she told me the next day, and I was livid. I was still angry when I saw him in the club 3 months later, so I went up to him, tapped him on the shoulder to make him turn around. I told him that if he wanted to kill me, I was standing right in front of him, and then I punched him in the face. Didn't even get kicked out of the club. Got a begging Facebook message from him that night asking me to leave him alone. He'd done nothing to me, etc., etc. I sent him a scathing message back and have never spoken or seen him since. Story 58. I want to say this was 1997. AOL chat. Became friends with a girl from the same city, Las Vegas. We spoke on the phone for hours, over a couple calls, and decided to meet. She never showed up, so we talk on the phone after, and she tells me exactly what I was wearing and also described the friend I was with perfectly. She told me she was standing right next to me but didn't have the courage to say hello. Buttered me up with a, "You're really, really hot and I want you really, really bad," and I panicked. I decided, hey, it happens, let's try this again. I take a different friend with me this time, and we went to a spot on the strip in Vegas. My friend and I were standing outside a McDonald's on the sidewalk and kept hearing a girl in a car driving by yelling, "Woohoo!" which was a catchphrase of sorts for her, and I immediately recognized it. My best friend started talking sense into me and telling me I was a putz if I stayed any longer, so we left. I wrote her a long email when I got home and basically told her I really appreciated being made fool of and that we should probably just stop talking. A few days later, I started finding notes on my car after work from her. I did unfortunately tell her where I worked during one of our talks. After that, I started finding notes left on my car when I'd visit a particular friend. Then it started happening at my house. As this was happening, I called her and wrote her many times telling her to stop. Of course, she never responded. Wherever I went those days, I was constantly looking around, taking note of anyone who I might have seen anywhere. Fast forward a week, and I'm at my friend's house where I had found notes on my car. We were playing basketball, and a car pulls up with a single woman inside. She says she's this girl's mother and that she won't be bothering me anymore. She also said that she can see why she was obsessed with me as she looked me up and down. She was maybe 50, quite large, and had really bad caked on makeup and a slight smell of sulfur masked by a strong perfume. I'll never know for sure if this woman was indeed her mother or was the stalker herself. Crap scares me now that I'm older. I was just an idiot 18-year-old and just shrugged my shoulders after that and moved on. Nothing else ever came of it, but with the amount of knowledge about my everyday life this person had, I've always wondered if they randomly stalked me after that. Story 59. Thought I'd jump in. I was late teens, too late to be catfished, but whatever. I met this girl over BBM chat. Was it a thing in America? Although I still have no idea how she got my pin to add me, we spoke for a long time. Months. We ended up having nightly calls and flirting and laughing. It was great. And although I didn't have problems with girls in real life, she was just so much more understanding and interesting. However, after 3 months, I still hadn't seen what she looked like. Every time I'd ask for a photograph of her, she would make excuses about her camera being broken or her being around people. She then sent me 3 photos, and I was blown away. The girl in the photos was gorgeous, really stunning, and me, trusting this girl way too much at that time, believed it was her. I actually stopped talking to real-life girls to be with her. It all stopped when one day we arranged to meet up and she never showed. She then stopped replying. 7 years later, I'm a police officer and I get a call to an ongoing domestic between a mother and daughter. On arrival, I separate the two. My colleague speaks to the mother and I speak to the daughter. She keeps looking at me like she knew me, but I just put it down to having seen me about in town in uniform. She gives me her name and I recognize it as the same name as my online love. But again, I brush it off, as it's not that uncommon of a name. Then as she talks, I recognize the voice, and then her laugh. It was super distinctive, but it looked nothing like the girl in the photo. She was about 200 and heavy pounds, and facially nothing like the girl I fell in love with. She was about 220 pounds heavier, and facially nothing like the girl I fell in love with. My heart was literally broken as I realized what the heck had happened, and it took a lot of professionalism not to confront her. I tell her my name, as it was on my name badge anyway, and she looks like she's seen a ghost. I then had to stop myself from going off on her. That night, I had a Facebook friend request from someone with the same name, but the same girl in the photos from years before, only older. Blocked that crap real quick. It's easier to be tricked online than people think, guys. Story 60. Oh, we're going back some now. I was living with a friend and had set up a Yahoo profile linked to my Yahoo Messenger. Moved out and hadn't been online in a year-ish when one night I got a random pop-up message. Started chatting to this guy and we clicked. We chatted online only for about 3 months, then by phone as well for another few months. He was Australian, 26, a guitar tutor, into weights, etc. He drove 2 hours down to meet me and we got on like a house on fire. 6 months later, and he's spending almost every weekend with me and driving down once in a week too, we decide on a holiday to visit my family who are out of the country. Fly out there and meet all of my family, stay at my sister's, babysit her daughter, get home and carry on with life. One day, about 2 years in, he lends me a book, and when he's at his, I decided to read it. Out of the book comes an invoice addressed to someone else. I give him a call to ask about it, and he has a big conversation with someone, who I can't hear responding, about how careless it was to leave a client's business document lying about. Okay, fair enough. He collects it to take home next time he's over. My spidey senses are a-tingling though. Not sure why, just a bit weird. So one day he's popped out to the car and I see he's left his wallet on the side, so I decide to have a peek. Inside it is empty, except for one bank card, with the name of the client. Not one for confrontation. I say nothing until he's gone. I have a huge conversation with him about it. He says he uses a fake name because of an ex who stalked him. Big, long backstory. Believable, but by now I'm paranoid AF and turned into Columbo minus the wonky eye. We'd been dating for more than 2 years at this point. It took me a little more than a week before I discovered 1. He wasn't an Aussie. 2. He was 32, not 26. 3. He was a bus driver. 4. He was married. I sent him a copy of an extract of his marriage certificate that I found online and never heard from him again. F doing an accent for 2 years, by the way. Story 61. When I was around 12 or 13, I was heavily involved in the anime convention scene. I knew creepers were out there, but I didn't think they would bother me since I would usually be dressed up as a male character with almost every inch of my skin covered up, which was extremely naive of me. I also got way too comfortable with the idea of older people being friends with me since most of my genuine friends were 16 or older. So when a guy 10 years my senior messages me on Facebook, it's nothing new. We started talking, nothing weird from what I remember, just casually making conversation and being friendly. That continued on for maybe a month or so. Then there was an anime convention coming up he wants to meet up at. Sure, why not? I'd done that before. So around lunchtime, he's messaging me that he's there. I'd been there for a few hours already, actually with my dad and a friend of mine. I was upset because my friend had basically ditched me and I wasn't good at socializing on my own, so when he offered that we could meet, I was relieved to have a friendly face to talk to. I see him approach, so I tell my dad I'll be right back and go to meet him. We say hi. He says something to the effect of, "There's something I want to show you." I start following him out of the crowded dealer's room, and then it finally clicks that, "Holy crap, you idiot, you're following a random guy to who knows where. Stop this right now." I say something in a panic about how my dad is waiting on me and how I remember it is I said that and he left almost immediately. I returned to my dad, and we left the conversation soon after. Funny enough, he later went on Facebook chewing me out over it because it was embarrassing and a waste of his time. I blocked him. I never told my parents what happened. They were overprotective anyway, and that would have gotten me banned from cons or social media, and both were my only social outlets. That was the end of that. It was like a picture-perfect PSA on stranger danger. Right down to the corny, "I have something to show you. Follow me out of this area where all these witnesses are." Definitely taught me a lesson on how naive I really was, and thankfully with no more trauma than the realization that it could have quickly gotten so much worse. Alright guys, that concludes our stories of traumatic and almost traumatic and generally just upsetting stories altogether. I hope you guys had a great time listening. If you have any stories you want to share, feel free to drop them down below. And friendly message, be safe on the internet.